Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our weekly live stream Q&A and news stream. Make sure you like the video if you haven't subscribed for more content like this. We do this every single week, and we discuss all the latest in Star Wars news. And this week, there is a lot to discuss, including a very, very big topic that we did do a video on last week, kind of giving you our thoughts and general kind of predictions and spitballing around the Simon Kinberg trilogy. We're going to re-talk about that for people who either haven't seen the video, but also mostly just to interact with you guys. And in that same way, this is a live stream and Q&A. Every time we do these, we turn it over to you to ask your questions, send in your comments, your thoughts about not just the latest news stories, but basically everything that you guys would like to discuss. So that is open, and we have lots of comments and questions already in the chat. So keep sending them in. If you'd like to support the channel, super chat is always appreciated. It will also bump up your comment or your question to the top, and it will make sure we get it on the stream. We usually go about an hour and a half to 2 hours on these streams, depending on the flow of the conversation. So there's no guarantee your comment will get on. It is first come, first serve. So if you'd like to make sure, send in a super chat. You can also join our membership program. We have lots of members in the chat right now. And we also do have the same perks on memberships on Patreon. So if you prefer Patreon to memberships, both are there. You get a lot of extra perks with the channel, multiple different tiers, extra content, extra lives on some tiers, all sorts of extra things. So check that out if you guys are interested in getting even more Star Wars Lads content there. But we're going to talk about these big stories because one in particular is a huge story. And then the second story is more of an exciting story. We get to look forward to something real coming, something we know is actually coming out. And that is Andor Season 2, finally getting a release date for the first episode of Andor Season 2, or first 2 episodes of Andor Season 2, we probably assume. And so we're going to talk about that, as well as some of the D23 Brazil information. We did get some concept art for Mandalorian and Grogu. We got more information about Andor Season 2. So lots of good stuff to discuss today. But as always, these shows are driven by your chats. So make sure you send in your chats to the comment section or the chat room here, and we will get to them first come, first serve. We also do kind of cherry pick the chats based on the topics after we go over the topic. So if you have something to say about this specific topic, we will get to that chat most likely sooner than off-topic chats until we're done with the news stories. So let's kick it off. And yes, this story is 5 days old now at this point, but it is important, and we want to hear you guys' thoughts. So for those of you who are unaware, Simon Kinberg, co-creator of Star Wars Rebels, producer on Star Wars Rebels, producer on Deadpool and Wolverine, and most of the X-Men movies post First Class, Simon Kinberg has been supposedly hired to write a new trilogy of Star Wars films by Lucasfilm. This was broken by Deadline, a very accredited Hollywood outlet. So this news should be considered pretty official. Now, the one thing that is up for debate, though, and they even admit it in their article, is Deadline, the reporter from Deadline, has been told that this is going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12. Other Hollywood insiders dispute that it's going to be episodes 10, 11, and 12. That still remains up for debate. But what you can expect and what you can basically pencil in is that at least behind the scenes, Simon Kinberg has been hired, and he is currently working on writing and producing a new trilogy of Star Wars films. So as we talked about in our video last week, Sanak, there are a whole world of possibilities for a new trilogy of Star Wars films. The reports continue to come out about this topic over the last few days since we made our video about the fact that this trilogy is going to be centering around new characters and new stories, which is not surprising because that's kind of what we heard about Damon Lindelof's Rey movie as well. But there also have been rumors that Rey is involved in this trilogy. So it's not like a Star Wars Legacy where it takes place 200 years after the events of the Skywalker saga. So there's a lot to take in here. Nothing for certain. Just to reiterate kind of some of your thoughts we talked about in our previous video for tonight's live audience. What do you think of Simon Kinberg being hired to do a new trilogy of Star Wars films? Whether you think it could be set 10, 11, and 12, or do you think it could be something completely different and some of the reporting is a little off?
I think I'd go with the latter. I mean, above everything else, my where I stand right now is I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it, right? I'll be in theaters. The crawl will be coming down. It'll be saying episode 10. It'll be saying whatever the name of the movie is. And I'll be like, yeah, yeah, that's a Star Wars movie that's happening, right? You know, more realistically, a trailer, but that is where I stand on it. I don't see any serious serious moves being made right now that like are overtly putting us into a path of like, hey, this is like where we're going to be in 3 years with Ray as a character, the future of the sequel trilogy era, how we're going to flesh that and all that. I don't see it yet. Now that being said, I am fairly positive on Kinberg. I think especially a little bit more so than when we first recorded our video and put it out on the channel. Obviously, he had his involvement with that first season of Star Wars Rebels and a little bit past that as well. And he helped co-write some of the best episodes. So I'm pretty pleased by that. On the other hand, there have been rumors, especially from Days in Future Past, that what his script was okay, and then what it was lacking was like the dialogue that Bryan Singer's like, we really needed to push the dialogue to really elevate the script for Days of Future Past, which that is a pretty iconic, very not necessarily meme worthy, but there's a lot of iconic lines that people that still even today quote from that. It's what, 10 years old now. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited by the possibility of an episode 10, 11, 12. I'm excited with the fact that Kinberg's already gotten involvement. I'm excited that it is a trilogy being worked on instead of piecemeal, because the only person who got that to work was George Lucas, and he couldn't repeat it twice. So, uh, yeah, in my mind, I'm like, okay, that all sounds good, but it'll only be real to me when I finally get to see a trailer of it and I get to see real casting, leaked photos, stuff like that. And we've been kind of circling around the drain at this point with like, oh, there's a Rogue Squadron film. Oh, Sean Levy film. Oh, there's going to be Taika Waititi film. And now there's rumors that those are all still in development. It's like, all right, that's all great. But like, when is the first real step? And Mandalorian and Grogu was never even part of that Celebration 2023 lineup. It obviously kind of came into play once Disney kind of moved away from everything being on Disney Plus and pushing it a little bit more obviously as like, hey, we can convert this and as a movie. Same thing happened here with Moana. That was supposed to be a TV show because of the success of the original film on Disney Plus, but now they're like, nope, we converted it into Moana 2 for theaters before the live action remake comes out. It's just more profitable, it gets more attention, it's a little bit more of a straightforward industry, and that's why Mandalorian Grogu is in place. But what comes next after that, I don't know. And that's also further complicated now by the fact that, is it 10 to 12? Is it New Jedi Order trilogy now? And because Daisy Ridley was very positive, imminent news is coming. That's what she's been saying. Now there's rumors that there's like 3 different things. Sean Levy might be working on a Ray one. That's different from Charmin's. That's different from Kinberg's, and they might all involve Ray at different points. Ray in 10 to 12, if that happens, might be an Obi-Wan Kenobi like figure. It's like, okay, great. They're going in on the character, which I think that's the best thing to look at. Will it actually play out in 3 distinct different films and eras? No, I don't buy that any second. That's incredible dedication to one character. And yes, she is arguably the most worthwhile character left from the sequel trilogy, unless you like revive Ben Solo, Kylo Ren in some way. But yeah, I mean, it's all exciting news, but it's again news that we've kind of heard before in different forms. It's just now it's been a little bit more centered around a specific character. It now does seem like things are a little bit more focused on chronologically building up over time instead of just jumping different eras, which I think that at least gives me a little bit more confidence. But that's like going
Yeah.
from 10 to 15%.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on pretty much any Star Wars project we talk about. I won't believe it until it's on my screen, really. But as for the Ray movie, I've always, you guys know this if you watch our lives consistently. I've always felt two different ways about episodes 10, 11, and 12. I've always said since the beginning, since our first questions talked about this, that it was like either going to be one of two things. It was going to be a Star Wars Legacy-esque show, or I mean, series of movies where it takes place far off in the future. They just don't want to really have to deal with the sequels and what happens after the sequels, what happens to the governments, all that type of stuff. And they just do something really far away. They save the numbering for that to get people interested, even if it's characters and settings we've never seen or heard of. The numbers will get people to go watch them regardless because they're considered part of the Skywalker saga. I've always thought that was the direction they were going to go. Then when the Rey movie got announced, I felt, especially with the writers and stuff, all the problems they seem to be having behind the scenes, the way it seems to have been drifting away from the original intent, which was Damon Lindelof's movie about Rey as an older guardian of new characters. It started to change and shift and morph. And with that behind the scenes drama, I've now started to feel like that could also be a direction they go. It was announced as New Jedi Order. Slowly, it's going to morph and change into episode 10, The New Jedi Order. That's kind of how I felt. And then they were going to piggyback off of that and make a couple more to get in hype and excitement. Because as we talked about the other day, we all think the Rey character, for the most part, with the general audiences, I think people still have a relatively positive view of Rey. They'll still go watch the Rey movies, the Rey character, but there is a deep rooted dislike and disdain for the Rey character and the sequel trilogy amongst a lot of the Star Wars fan base. And so, how do you cater to both Star Wars, that side of the Star Wars fan base, the side of Star Wars fan base that likes Rey, and then the general public who probably is indifferent and just going to go watch Star Wars? Well, I think you put episode 10 on there, that gets all those groups to at least go see the movie. You know, it might make a bigger target on its back, but it gets everybody to go watch it for sure. And so as we start to see all this stuff unfold, it is interesting when you hear about a new trilogy, like you were saying, Cynic. Now Rey is now rumored to be in every project they're working on. It's like we go from, are they ever going to do Rey again? Are they ever going to touch on the sequels again? To now, oh, we have one Rey movie, oh, but it keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And now we've got a Rey movie, but also 5 other movies. I think that's actually a fairly good direction to take the character, to be honest. Like, if you wanted 10, 11, and 12, like I was kind of hinting at before, legacy esque, all new characters, all new government, all new kind of timeline, but you do with the like Jeff Snyder's report about Rey being the Obi-Wan of another trilogy, you do actually make her a part of that. Maybe that initial trilogy gives her a bit of life for people in the same way Obi-Wan, most people's favorite version of Obi-Wan, or a lot of people's favorite version of Obi-Wan, is the prequel version. Then you kind of go back and tell her stories, her younger stories, how she got to that point, how she repositioned the galaxy to that point, how you continue to evolve and change the galaxy through the actions of Rey, and how she really earns the title of Rey Skywalker, how she continues to build upon the Rey Skywalker legacy, the Skywalker legend. All those different things can be told as semi prequels, even if you do 80-year-old, 90-year-old Rey in a new trilogy, right? So there's a lot of different places where you can do a lot of different things. I mean, what gets me excited for this just in general is that they seem to starting to craft a plan across all their projects, for better or worse. The cinematic universe thing is coming to Star Wars. It's pretty much already here with the Mandalorian shows. And now they're doing the Mandalorian in movies, and it's going to connect to the shows, and then it will probably connect to a new movie, and it'll connect to this and that. They're starting one already. It seems like that's kind of direction they want to go with Rey. Maybe 10, 11, and 12, as I mentioned in the video the other day. Maybe those movies come out every 3 to 5 years, like the Avengers. And Sean Levy's movie and Charmine's movie and all these other movies build and connect in between, connect the dots, build up the era into episode 12 being something truly, truly epic instead of just being the third movie in a trilogy. It's now the culmination of like 8 movies, even if it is the third in the 10, 11, 12 trilogy. There's a lot of things they can do, but I think right now, at least, it's semi hopeful that a lot of these things are all seemingly on a similar track. The pessimist could say they don't really know what they're doing and they're trying to have a bunch of different people try to figure out the story. The optimist can say, hey, they want Ray to be a part of all these different projects and they're trying to figure out a way to connect them all. So we'll see either way. But Jeff Snyder, that report about the Obi-Wan role, that's something we have heard in the past about this original idea for before Charmin was on board, but when it was Damon Lindelof of the Ray movie, that was initially the idea. And so going back to that, this might be more of a direct continuation of what Damon Lindelof's original idea is. And then now the new Jedi Order movie might transform and morph into something a bit more specific to the Rey character. And so you can have your future and your present at the same time. So we'll see where that goes. But let us know your guys' thoughts in the comments section. We're going to get to a few right now in the chat here, talking about this specific topic, the Simon Kinberg trilogy. Is it a Rey trilogy? Is it taking place beyond Rey? Is it taking place at the same time as Rey's New Jedi Order? Is it a sequel to the Rey New Jedi Order movie? Is that movie a prequel to this series of movies? What do you guys think? Let us know in the chat. So our first one is Anthony Tiff, who says, I think Simon Kinberg making a new Star Wars trilogy is cool, and he is the right man for the job as he co-created Rebels with Dave Filoni and is overall a nerd in general. Yeah, I think he certainly has the nerd credentials to work on something like this. And I think as a producer, like you were kind of saying, Sonic, with Days of Future Past, as a producer writer, I do see his role being more so like a showrunner, where he comes up
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the ideas, he comes up with the story, and then they're going to slowly fill it in with other writers to write the actual script and dialogue. He's going to be the architect of this thing. And I think in that scenario, having produced and co-created a big long-running TV show, having produced so many of these X-Men movies that all interconnect, I think that is a good role for somebody like him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when we look at him as a director, and we talked about this too in the video that we put out, it's a little bit not as, positive. And, we still have to qualify that because he wanted to originally do the Dark Phoenix saga as a two-parter, kind of bring an end to the Fox X-Men universe that way. But, this is business, right? The film industry is no different than any other profit-based industry, right? You have to do what's right for your business. You have to do what's right for your investors, your partners, all this and that. And like he had to do it in one film, and then he kind of had to change the villain because um, the alien species, it's not the Kree, it's the Skrulls. Yeah, the Skrulls were originally the original characters, the aliens of his Dark Phoenix film. He changed it to something else because MCU Marvel said nope, stay away from that idea. Even though he basically gets shot around like that, it feels like an incomplete film and rushed. And I'm not saying that two films would have made it better, but this is not a storyline that you can tell in a single film, at least that we've seen so far, right? It's something that deserves its time, its richness, its twists and turns, really exploring the psychology of the Phoenix persona, everything like that, right? So uh, he had a really tough docket, laid out in front of him. It didn't turn out great, right? And it's not like he was like the only negative of the Fox X-Men universe after really peaking again with Days of Future Past, which he had a role in again as a sort of producer writer. What was the very next thing when people were like really hyped for Fox to like keep on doing their X-Men thing right as the MCU is also growing up? Apocalypse, and they had Oscar Isaac. It's not like they didn't have great acting talent, didn't have the same amount of like writers and team around it. It just completely bombed. It just was boring. It was dull. So it's not like it was entirely up to him, but he was in a pretty difficult position. Things just didn't work out. But yes, I think his nerd credentials with Star Wars specifically are there. Uh, you could say that Rebels, people would be like, that first season. Even myself, I was like, it's fun. It's like, I don't know if it's anything great. But then once we get to that finale over Mustafar with Kanan and his evolution, with Ezra and everyone else, like, yeah, I was like, man, this is some great stuff. And you know what? He helped co-write that episode. So yeah, I think that only shows that he has at least a strong base to pull up from. And obviously now Dave Filoni, chief creative officer, right? So he'll have a say in what's going on here, and they've already got that partnership. Yeah, I again, like you said, showrunner is the right way of putting this. Let's lay out like a booklet of what we want the story, its concepts, how it's going to be laid out. Now, how that's actually played out, what are the scenes filling in, the dialogue, characters, that can change. But here are our landmarks, and that's something the sequel should have had. I still think you could have done the sequels even without that, but it's a lot harder to hit that bullseye in today's world that's saturated by so much higher and higher level, blockbuster level filmmaking that, what Star Wars revolutionized, it suddenly became like, oh, I've just kind of done that. And, the MCU gets away with it, and it did for a lot of phase two because that's the nature of superhero films. You can kind of ignore it and just keep building past and pull out the best pieces as you need. At 2015, when episode 7 and 8 and 9 were coming out, you only had 6 other films and the Clone Wars TV show to really say as canon. There's a limit to how much you could just be like, "Let's ignore all that stuff." You can't. That's not how the universe is built out, and there's just a lot less to it. So, I understand to some degree what Iger was pushing for. Again, he admits that he pushed it way too quickly, way too fast, especially episode 9 when it needed more time, especially after Carrie Fisher's unfortunate passing. But if they have actually properly learned their lessons here, it seems to be somewhat manifesting around the development with Kinberg.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I hope that's really the reason he's there is
Yeah.
because they're serious about learning from the past. And also, like I think in a lot of ways too, we talk about how many canceled projects there are, how many things that have fallen apart. And people will use that to target Kathleen Kennedy and the leadership and all that type of stuff, which can be fair at times. But also, Marvel doesn't just have Kevin Feige; they have 3, 4, 5 producers who produce pretty much every movie, right? And I'm sure their roles are spread out to everything. Um, we don't often hear about a producer getting announced for something right off the bat. You hear writers with Star Wars, you hear directors with Star Wars. You don't hear about producers. And I think in some ways that also is maybe Kathleen Kennedy as well, giving credence to the idea that like she can't be in 50 places at once. Here's somebody who can spearhead this project and let her oversee the studio. Have these people who actually can spearhead each one of these projects so she doesn't have to be the lead producer on everything and run Lucasfilm. I think that's maybe a step that where they're headed. Maybe that's where they're going is hiring these showrunner-esque producers to lead everything. I mean, you got Dave Filoni and John Favreau on everything over there. I'm sure Dave Filoni will basically, now that he's CCO, be producer on every Star Wars thing you see coming out. But you need more than just the people who are in the office in San Francisco to work on this stuff. You need people who are going to be active producers on the ground, on set all the time, overseeing these projects. And I think this is a good direction to head with this type of person like Simon Kinberg. Anthony says it's perfect chance to expand on Ray's character and to maybe restore some light to the sequels. I think that's what they're trying to do. It's interesting though, to move on to other characters directly. I think it could be an approach that helps, like I was kind of saying earlier, build up these characters so far past the sequels that it kind of builds a little nostalgia for the sequels. It builds a nostalgia for the time around the sequels. I mean, we are getting to The Force Awakens 10th anniversary next year. I would imagine at this point, by the time the Rey movie comes out, we might have the 10th anniversary of The Force Awakens having come and gone and the 10th anniversary of The Last Jedi. So there's going to be kind of this new wave of nostalgia and renaissance. I would imagine toward the sequels. We've kind of just debated over these shows about what's that wave of nostalgia going to look like for the sequels versus the wave we got for the prequels, right? That completely redeemed the prequels in the public eye, and I don't know. There's a lot of factors that went into the redemption of the prequels in the public eye versus the sequels. To me, one of the factors I've always thought is a toss up really is there should be a lot of nostalgia towards the sequels for from kids who were kids when those movies came out, but also in the same vein, when we were kids and fell in love with the prequels, there wasn't as easy access to the mounds and message boards and YouTube channels of people hating on the sequels, the influencers teaching us to not like the prequels at the time when we were kids. So we grew up loving them, and then when we had a voice, we gave that voice out. I hope that fire is there for people who grew up with the sequels, because you worry if they're people who are completely all over, Star Wars social media, that fire might be quenched a little bit. But hopefully there is some light there, and hopefully it just kind of restores those characters. I think that's the main place you need to start, restoring love for those characters, the love that was there after The Force Awakens. I mean, it's undeniable. If you want to teleport back to 2015, there was a lot of love there for Rey, Finn, and Poe. People did really like those characters. You start hearing instantly that they were better than Anakin and Padme and Obi-Wan, so you you got to restore that love, build on the nostalgia, start to really create a cohesion there, and an interest in the journeys of those three characters. And then after that, then you can go in and fill those gaps, because the fortunate part about, the filling in the gaps of Luke, Leia, and Han in Star Wars canon, you couldn't do that because of the ages of the actors. The fortunate part for the sequels is you could always go back and tell as many stories as you want with those three characters between whatever episode 10, 11, and 12 is and when we last saw them. So it would be nice to have a chronology, a perfect chronology, but hey, I'll take whatever that we can get that helps improve those movies and improve the overall reception of those characters.
Yeah, can't say anything better than that.
Skywalker's Academy says, hello there. I guess you might get to my comments eventually. We are going to get to it earlier because you're on topic. Kinberg's movies will be a long, long time from now. They're in the brewer, percolating with everything else that's in production. Yeah, you're right. And if they ever happen, I mean, like you're basically alluding to, they might never happen. But I would imagine, like, let's say story ideas are coming in right now. Maybe he's starting to bring in together a team. At best, in the next 6 months, we might hear that he actually has a writer on board to pin the script. You're looking at earliest a production schedule probably starting at the end of 2025, possibly in place of the Ray movie they have now. But obviously, more realistic estimation would be end of 2026, which would mean a 2028 to 2029 release. So we're still a long ways away from ever seeing these movies. And we have a lot of other Star Wars movies that I'm sure have precedent because they've been in the works for far longer. But yeah, here's hoping that these actually get made.
Yeah, no, I mean, no matter what happens, we do have to deal with the big elephant in the room, and I'm not trying to be negative here or anything. I'm obviously a very big fan of it, but the Mandoverse, that is the key thing that's happening right now, and it is still the priority, right? Like, we can take our time. I know the gap between episode 3 and episode 7 is only 10 years, but it feels more because you're ignoring the fact that you're kind of skipping over the original trilogy, and that adds almost like a 10-year minimum extra feeling of like a separation. Whatever happens next with Ray won't feel that same way because we're seeing Daisy Ridley today. Frankly, she looks just like she did in 2015 when the film came out. John Boyega looks just the same. If anyone has aged in that cast, it's Oscar Isaac, and I mean, he looks gorgeous still, man. Like, look at that man. That's incredible good looking guy, and he's like, oh, I'm 50. Would you believe that? No, right? So like, this cast can grow and take their time and come back when they want to, and not necessarily be tied together as a trio in the same way, right? So yeah, I'm not really worried in any way about like when that delay will come, or if we're gonna have to take an extra another 5 years. I'm just tired of the whole Lucasfilm thing of like announcing a project and then nothing comes out of it. And then because they announce something, then leakers and official people on Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, and all that get some information and bits, throw that out there. It's a vicious media cycle. And especially when it was just around the Rey's New Jedi Order film in the last few months, it's felt like that flipping back and forth with the Lindelof coming on and then leaving. Obviously, he said good things. He's like, it just, they were looking at a different direction. And They seem to have departed on pretty good terms there, right? Just creative differences. Stephen Knight coming in, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's great, like another top tier writer," and then he's left. We haven't heard anything, but he's busy with Peaky Blinders. Everyone who is connected to the industry obviously trying to get clicks. It's a vicious cycle when it was just centered around that one film. Now that it's kind of blown up to like there's a trilogy here. No, there's the new Jedi Order film. Now there's like another one that could be about her too. She's like a figurehead for basically all of them. It's like I'm a little bit happier because I don't have to. It's harder to pinpoint and make something negative immediately. It's more of like the process itself in the media cycle has been annoying at best, right? So, yeah, it'll happen when it happens. Manaverse, I think it should still be the priority, especially when there's a very real possibility that the Mandalorian Grogu turns out to be a big hit, both commercially and critically. And then from there, you're like, well, why not make another film and then make another, right? And then maybe that middle film becomes a nice real bridge to that third film, which is what the Dave Filoni New Republic film was going to be anyway. So who knows? Maybe Ahsoka season 2 gets finished off and kind of blended into this Mandalorian and Grogu too, where all the forces are marching toward the big screen, and then by that point, everyone, even if you haven't watched everything on Disney Plus, you'll get the big gist of the story that you need. All the character setup, bam, there's your New Republic film that was announced at Celebration 2023. You're back on schedule, just a few years off course, right? So what kind of comes down? Oh man, the dates that were put out there vaguely for Ray stuff. Okay, but Daisy Ridley is still aging into that 15-year gap. It's 15 years after Episode 9. That's when the Rey's New Jedi Order film is supposedly supposed to be set. We're not anywhere near close to that, so, yeah, I think we're fine. Honestly, we're fine. Take your time. Just build out the sequel era as best as you can with animated shows, with comics, with books, and all that, so by the time we actually get to those projects, to super sequel trilogy or Star Wars Legacy-esque jump and all that, we'll be like, at least this era feels like it's finally gotten some love and appreciation. That's the biggest thing missing that the prequels never really had that issue with. And that's what allowed so easily for that growth and love for kids growing up with it to come because they didn't have an entirely new era to concentrate on. They had that era and everything that came out of it.
Sure, and those are all great points, and I think that's part of it too, is the complete package that was there with the sequel I mean, the prequels and the original trilogy, right? Like, for people like us growing up, it was 6 movies. I think for a lot of people, the sequels exist so far off from where those movies take place, feature such different characters, it is a little easier to, I guess, ignore them when it comes to a full rewatch of the series. So yeah, they're all interesting points. We'll take one more comment here from Brandon before we move on to our second topic about Andor. Brandon says, I'm cautiously optimistic about Simon Kinberg as the director of the new trilogy because he was a producer for Fox projects like X-Men Apocalypse and Fantastic Four, which weren't successful in box office. Those are good points as well, but I think you could counter with Deadpool and Wolverine, Logan, X-Men, Days of Future Past, X-Men First Class, Deadpool 1. So you could counter with all those other ones. But yeah, I mean, he does have some misses, of course, as a producer, especially when you're a producer kind of involved in the studio system where your name's just going to get put on everything. If he's just like a kind of a general producer for X-Men. And I would also say one of the other concerns I have personally about the X-Men involvement is just the sheer disaster that was the X-Men timeline. I mean, a
Oh
part of
yeah.
that was the fact that they decided to keep going after Days of Future Past because I think First Class works great and Days of Future Past works great. But then they decided, oh, we're going to make each one of these movies a nostalgia trip for a certain decade, but that didn't really make sense because the characters didn't age. So you get like a 80s or 70s nostalgia with it was a Days of Future Past, the 70s nostalgia, and then
70s, yeah.
Apocalypse is 80s, and then they tried to do 90s with Dark Phoenix, but the characters never aged, so it was kind of strange. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because the movies overall are fairly good for how bad that timeline is. But thanks for your comment
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
David, oh, sorry, Sonic, you
I
go
just
ahead.
want to add, I mean, it's also like such a classic X-Men thing to have horribly confusing timelines. But that works more in comics when you can just draw, write your way, make variants, all that, right? Not
Right.
when you have the same actor and James McAvoy, who is what now, 40 something now, but like he was trying to play 50 something for Dark Phoenix, and then we've already seen the slightly de-aged version of Charles, and yeah, in Last Stand, and it's like, so in 6 years, he just had a really, really rough time or something, like, yeah, that's the nature of being in live action. You have to be cognizant of that in a way that you don't necessarily have to for comics, and you can kinda hand wave. So, yeah, hopefully that's not an issue with Star Wars here.
David's Field sends in a super chat. We greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much, David. Saying, what happens when Simon Kinberg parts ways with Lucasfilm in a year for creative differences like all other writer directors over the last 5 years? I don't know, David. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, the thing is, it's the sad reality is that I mean, kind of being tongue in cheek, but you're right. I mean, we have no reason to actually have faith that this project will come out. We have no reason to actually have faith that this will ever exist past this report. And so that is the disappointing and very cautious aspect. I think it's the thing that makes general enthusiasm around new Star Wars projects pretty low regardless of, of what it is, right? Like um these rumors about some of these movies, I don't doesn't seem like people really care that much because they don't have a track record of ever at getting any of this stuff made. I mean, it started with Ryan Johnson's trilogy, and then it moved to David Benioff and DB Weiss's series of movies. Then it moved to Taika Waititi. Then it moved to Kevin Feige. Not to mention the Phil Lord and Christopher Miller version of Han Solo that was changed after it was pretty much done to the Ron Howard version of Solo. So this might never happen. But I think what you can be assured about is if this is actually episode 10, 11, and 12, I don't see a world that doesn't happen at some point in the history of humanity. It will happen. There will be a 10, 11, and 12. Even if Star Wars, like, you want to be the most pessimistic Star Wars fan, the one that hates everything, right? I'm not saying you are, but just for hypotheticals, let's say somebody is, and Star Wars actually does die. Like, every movie they put out for 10 straight years bombs. Every show they put out bombs. It's just seemingly a dead franchise walking. Give it 5 years, 10 years, there will be another movie. They will try to reboot it. They will have a 10, 11, and 12. So it's going to happen. And I think that's maybe the only thing you can take for sure with 100% certainty is that episode 10 will happen at some point in the course of human history. Whether it will be from Simon Kinberg, that still remains to be seen.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the same sentiments. You're right to feel a little bit jaded, right? And I don't want to go into this whole like hating on Kathleen Kennedy, clickbaity thing. No, I mean, incredible respect for her. She's one of the greatest producers of all time. But her presidency has been a bit hit or miss. And yes, a lot of it does fall on Iger too. In his own autobiography, he makes it very clear. I pushed them, I rushed them, I put them on your intervals with these Star Wars stories in between, right? And that was also the original plan. Like, let's fill in whatever story that kind of comes to mind, especially a lot of these character ones that, like, someone mentioned the chat, the Guillermo del Toro Jabba story and stuff like that, right? Like, that was the plan, that we'd be able to do these bigger event films and then still make 800 to 700 million dollars off of all these other smaller scale stories, right? And I think as Star Wars fans, at least this is what Liam and I have probably agreed on a little bit. That seemed a little too excessive and crazy. It was just the hype was there, and let's keep it going until it stops, right? Um, yeah, and like that wasn't gonna happen, but yeah, I think Iger really did push that brand for almost like immediate return on investment, and it did to some degree. Disney Plus era really was a big hit for them, right? Mandalorian started off really strong with 2 incredibly great seasons, right? As even if you don't like Obi-Wan Kenobi, that did numbers for sure. Book of Boba Fett also did numbers for sure. Like, it was more once they started making their MCU light on the television screen for Star Wars with this New Republic era that things started faltering again. But yeah, I mean, yes, there were mistakes made from the conception of the sequel trilogy, how it's laid out, how it's envisioned. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. And Kathleen has a role to play in all that. But I think it's really sad that people automatically dismiss all of the big hits, right? She's still credited with the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian that everyone likes to always throw out there, but then blame her for season 3. She's still there for Andor, right? She's still there for Ahsoka. Yeah, I mean, it sucks, but I think the unevenness of her and her time as the presidency, you can definitely criticize that. And I think just as much as Iger kind of came back after the whole Chapek, let's just further mass bomb all of our franchises with as much quantity over quality, just like you did with the Disney VHS direct to VHS kind of era that he first came up in. Did the same thing here with the Disney Plus era. I think that now that we're pulling back and, Iger has come and he's already being prepped to leave at the start of 2026, I believe. I think it's maybe a good idea to start moving forward away from Kathleen, not in a bad way. I think she should get a big final hurrah with these, at least the Mandalorian and Grogu, maybe if they're already starting work on the New Republic film, maybe make that her last one, but you need to have someone like a Feige-esque figure, and I know you can't just make those in a lab. That's without a doubt, right? But you need to have a little bit more direction, just a little bit of a soft reset from upper level, just so that she can go out with the couple of big wins and then, make way for the next era of Lucasfilm, right?
Mhm.
We've tried it a couple years again and again and again. She has had successes. Do not ever put this on me saying that I'm decrying her incredible work year after year after year. It's just that it's become a little uneven, and it's clear that she wasn't necessarily built to be a president of Lucasfilm, and no one knew that how that really would have looked like anyways under Disney. If George Lucas was still around, well, he would have been given the same criticisms. People would have been saying the same things to him, if and then maybe criticized him by saying, "Hey, there's only been like 2 films in 10 years since you bought." Kind of came under the Disney umbrella. What gives, right? People were going to criticize anyways, but yeah, I think it's a good time to, like, let her kind of sunset off with the New Republic era big hitter films and then move forward. I think that's where you'll finally start getting a real clear vision and direction for these Rey films. Because even that report that came out today, it seems like everyone's developing some sort of Rey ideas that could go from 3 different eras and stories to maybe 2 and like a TV show or something like that, right? And hopefully that is what happens. But that same report also says some people are aware of what's happening, some people aren't aware what the other person is doing. All right. And it's like they're kind of stepping over each other's toes. And like that's where the upper management should be very clear about, okay, this is what we're doing with our future, our 5 year, 10-year plan. And I'm sure they talked about this, but it's not coming out the way that they wanted to or expected to. And yeah, I think now is the time to like make that transition plans happen, because if you want Star Wars to continue 25, 30 years from now when Kathleen won't be here and won't be in position doing that, you have to kind of start building and taking those first steps now.
Yeah, and we know you're not trying to be pessimistic, David. I think we all have to have a healthy we have to all have a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to Star Wars projects. It's just the proof is in what they have shown us. It's not like we have any reason to be excited or faithful about these things. I mean, hell, even the 3 movies that got announced at an official Star Wars event, not over, the trades or insider leaks or whatever. The 3 that were announced almost 2 years ago at an official Star Wars event to fans, none of them look like they're coming anytime soon. I think Dave Filoni's, to be fair to that one seems to have been replaced by Mandalorian and Grogu, and possibly could still come out as a finale to the new movie version when I think it was initially billed to be the finale of a TV show universe. But other than that one, I mean, we talked about Dawn of the Jedi a few weeks ago. Says like, yeah, the writer said, yeah, we might start shooting maybe next year. Um, it's just there's nothing to really be certain about. I mean, we've gotten 0 movies since 2019, and it's a movie studio first and foremost. And yes, their priorities have shifted. Yes, the pandemic was in there and 2 strikes, so there's not, it's not completely all just them doing nothing, but there's a big thing there that there's a problem, obviously, there's a problem. So, we have no as fans, like you said, it's hard to keep having hope. I think we all have a breaking point, right? Like, I mean, even the most optimistic, happy Star Wars fans, I mean, Sonic and I try to stay as optimistic as possible, but I think even this year you've seen, especially with me, I know you guys have seen it with me, it's hard to keep that face as happy or optimistic as possible when both you're having these projects constantly getting canceled, but then also the projects you are getting aren't living up to what they should be. And it's not just really a matter of personal opinion. It's really a matter of overall quality has just not been high. When you get the fact that there are even debates over the quality of shows, right, proves that overall the quality isn't high enough. You need stuff like Andor where it's 90% of the fandom agrees it's great, or season 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian, 90% of the fandom agrees it's great. You always have those detractors, right? But the fact that you're constantly getting shows where there needs to be a debate, is it good, is it bad? That means it's not up to snuff. So between the projects not being up to snuff and constant cancellations, it's hard to have too much optimism and faith. You just need to be skeptical, but also put your ideas out there and be excited for what the possibilities are. And that's where, I've found a lot of personal comfort when we talk about Star Wars is I'm really enjoying the possibilities of the future. Things will get better. Something's going to happen. It's too big of an IP. It's too big of a franchise to just let go. Things will change. Things will improve. It's just a matter of that, we can't we can't really have that belief until we're given the great products and the projects consistently churning out. Both of those things, I think, will restore a lot of the faith in Star Wars and a lot of the excitement around the franchise. But yeah, I mean, we're the consumers. They have to show us that their products are worth consuming. And right now,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of mixed feelings about a lot of this stuff, to be kind, so, but yeah, that's the Ray stuff, and we'll talk about that more. We'll go through the comments, because we've already gone for almost 50 minutes, and we haven't even gotten to Andor, so let's get to Andor real quick, and then we will come back to this conversation, and keep sending in the chats, of course, and we will get to everything as soon as we can, but we can talk fairly briefly about Andor because there wasn't a whole lot. But the big news is, and speaking of things that people pretty much universally liked, Andor is coming back, and it is coming back on April 22nd.
That's correct.
April 22nd, 2025 is the release date for Andor episode 1 for sure. It still remains to be seen whether it's episode 1 and 2, episode 1, 2, and 3 like they did for season 1. I would imagine it's just gonna be a two-part premiere. I think with the first 3 of season 1, they knew they had a slower paced show. They were trying to get people invested right off the bat. So I think that's why they really went for it, and it's an IP that was less known. Now that there's excitement, and I'm sure we'll have pretty strong viewership numbers for episode 1 of Andor season 2. I don't think they need to put out more than 2 episodes, but it has been Disney Plus's consistent trend that pretty much every show since Ahsoka, every big show they've put out since Ahsoka has had a 2-episode premiere, even including stuff like Bad Batch. So, I expect a 2-episode premiere, and I'm very excited. It is April 22nd, 2025. If you guys, a lot of you follow our streams every week, I've been very concerned about Andor season 2 in conjunction with probably Disney Plus's other biggest show coming out next year, which is Daredevil. Daredevil was supposed to come out in March. I believe it is still coming out in March. And originally, when it was announced, let me look it up now. Originally, when it was announced, it was a 20 episode season. So I just kind of,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, there's no way they're going to release right in the middle of Daredevil Andor and have both shows at the same time. But there is a possibility that they take a mid-season break if it still is it still a 20 episode season or an 18
I
episode?
I think I think it was 18 originally, and then when they replaced the showrunners and kind of made sure that like we're officially bringing back all of the Netflix connections and story there, they're like, okay, we'll do 9 episodes now, and then 9 episodes later. These will be individual seasons. It could definitely feel like a part one season, a part two season, almost like one of the most famous examples is like Breaking Bad, right? With
Yeah.
its first half and then its second half kind of being split off like that. I think that's what they're aiming for here. So yeah, just 9 episodes for this first season, which I think will definitely help with all these other stuff. And it's not like Disney hasn't had back-to-back shows or 1 or 2 weeks of overlap before. They've done that. It's just it hasn't been their memo most recently.
Yeah, and it certainly hasn't been shows to the magnitude of Andor season 2 and Daredevil Born Again, because I think,
Yeah.
like, Daredevil Born Again might be their biggest hit they've ever had on TV. I fully expect it to possibly, at least the first episode, have a massive viewership for the first episode. Maybe Mandalorian season 3 is the only thing that's comparable. Um, but I do think Andor season 2 will have a huge debut as well. That's a show that now at this point we're about 2 full years removed from Andor season 2, or no, 3 years almost full removed.
Yeah, two and
No,
a half
this year,
years.
2 year
Yeah,
2 years this year, 3 years would be next year.
yeah.
From the first or from the show ending. I believe it ended at the end of November in 2022. So, we're now almost 2 full years from the end of that show. It was nominated for an Emmy for Best Drama. It's a show that has consistently, I would imagine, gotten better and better viewership as people try to get in on the hype train as
Agree.
soon as the trailers and everything start coming out. I imagine this thing is going to be in full force. I think it will be a pretty big opening for Andor season 2. And it is a surprise right now. So yeah, IMDb right now does list each season of Daredevil as two separate seasons or two episode separate 9 episode seasons, but still thinks that season 2 is coming out in 2025. But yeah, I can imagine if that's a 2 episode premiere, it starts in March. Andor might be the next week after it ends, which
Yeah.
is kind of crazy. You'll have those back to back, but that should really boost Disney Plus ratings for the year, because Marvel does have a lot of stuff coming out next year. But back to Andor, we do have some clips, you could say, from Andor, part of another Disney Plus promo reel for 2025. We got one a couple weeks ago promoting Marvel stuff. Now we got one promoting Disney Plus's Star Wars stuff as well, on top of Marvel and all of that. There were only a couple shots of Skeleton Crew, which I was a little surprised about. Granted, it is most of it is coming out in 2024, but it is a 2025 show. It's their most, one that will be coming out at the beginning of the year. I'm surprised they're not using it a bit more to promote. But anyway, back to Andor. A lot of really generic stuff. A lot of shots of Cassian, a couple cool action shots, and then one shot that looks like it is on Yavin 4, which is pretty exciting. I mean, we all expected to see Yavin 4 in this season, but it is exciting to see them back on those sets from Rogue One and see the fully practical stuff that they've done so well throughout Andor season and one, and Rogue One come back here, and that's awesome. And then we got a shot of a KX droid, which might not be K2SO, because we got KX droids in the last season that weren't K2SO, but we know K2SO is going to be in this season. We are going to see probably a retelling of the comic issue that we got. If not that, at least I would imagine a few episodes with K2SO in this season. So a lot of exciting stuff, starting to slowly get the hype train rolling. Nothing too much to really speculate or talk about, but it is exciting that Andor is now here. It's coming. it's actually going to happen in the first half of the year, which I was very concerned they were going to push it back to September because that's when it worked 2 years ago. Now we're actually going to get it in April. Sonic, when you saw those clips and when you heard Andor's coming out in April, what were your thoughts?
Honestly, I think you might be downplaying a little bit the shots that we did get because it seems like we're getting the Gorman massacre there with the troopers, right? And Cassian seems to be involved. The shot of that TIE fighter, everyone thought it was like a TIE interceptor, but if you've been playing all the older games from the 90s and all that, that's a TIE Avenger right there. And there's a shot of it in space. So Cassian's in that and he blasts his way through. So that's going to be really, really interesting vibes for what they're going to do with that episode here. But I think the one that me personally I got excited for, besides, Cassian having the early Rogue One drip on Yavin 4, what got me excited was a shot of Bix and the background of them looking like it looks like Dantooine, right? Like there have been some BTS, some concept art of Dantooine. We've had concept art of Dantooine forever now. I think from Rebels was like the last one that had it too, but it makes sense, right? That was the Rebel base that was recently abandoned that Leia points Tarkin towards when she's very much coerced into it, and she's like, just to save her planet of Alderaan, to save the rebels, and obviously it doesn't work out that way. So it'll be very interesting to see if that is like what Bix and all those characters are doing, and if that implies they'll be alive coming into that final arc, or if that's a little bit more in the middle of the years, maybe like abandoned a whole year before or days before, right? That's kind of like that window that we're still working with. I do think that is K2SO. I think what will be interesting is that of all Star Wars creatives, to respect canon, it didn't really seem like Tony Gilroy would be the one to do that, but he's been really good about it, right? And yes, like you said, bringing in all these nice little references. People are obviously mentioning Lutheran Rails, like Antique Shop, and like some of the references to both EU and canon antiques and collectibles and all that, right? Yeah, it's a show that strangely has had a lot of reverence for what has already pre-existed there. I hope it rubs off in Filoni a little bit more. He doesn't go the more Lucasian way of like write what you want, right? I'd love to see all the other creatives, especially around Mandoverse, which should be interconnected. Really appreciating, enjoying that. But yeah, I think from what I'm seeing here, we will get some really, really nice, rich, deep cuts around the K2SO comic, that Cassian comic. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like B2 EMO is destroyed, and then you take his like memory unit, put it into the K2SO unit, and then or the K2 unit, and then that happens maybe off screen, obviously with that comic, and then just the next start, you're starting with K2SO, and you just leave a small little line about it. Obviously, they could definitely do it and flesh out stuff before, during, and after to make that comic almost like how the interludes of Aftermath are with Cobb Vanth, and then you get to see a little bit more of that PV, a little bit more inverted. That one is like almost like a simplification of a story. This would be more of an expansion of K2's origin story. Yeah, I think that would be great. I'm excited, man. Like, it's gonna be crazy that Disney Plus finally will have like a guaranteed 12, 13, 14 weeks of just episodic TV that isn't just adventure of the week, right? It's crazy, but people like TV shows when they're designed as TV shows, right? We're seeing it with The Penguin, for example, right? That has had just released today a 50% increase over its premiere episode with its finale. And that was a phenomenal TV show to watch from start to finish. So, yeah, but, Daredevil Born Again obviously comes from the Netflix model where it was very much many arcs with an overarching storyline, building towards something, but still being episode after episode after episode. Obviously, they've got the same actors, characters, keeping all that lore there. They're going to continue that. And then Andor is going to follow it up with what's going on there. Obviously, every 3 years, it's going to be a 1 year leap. What does that really mean for its storytelling versus season one? Not sure, but the more I think about it, I don't think it's going to change dramatically just because we know Cassian is like locked away for a long time in the prison, right? And then the heist episodes kind of take place over like a week or two. Like he is jumping through that year. The only difference now is that every 3 episodes will be jumping through the years, right? So Man, excited. Definitely excited. And I hope that both of those shows, especially Andor, is just like proof that, hey, while you want that HBO level of show, I don't think it's realistic to do that for every single Star Wars show, especially when you're kind of going for more of that fantastical space swords and wizardry, right? But when you can get a little bit more grounded with it, shoot it like this. Shoot it like this. Like all the shows will benefit from this sort of narrative structure being built as proper TV shows. But yeah, I mean, when you don't have to deal with a lot more effects heavy stuff, this is what it should be from the ground up. And you don't have to have this budget. Hopefully, Skeleton Crew is the same way, where it feels like episode after episode, you're building towards something without feeling like a stretched out movie.
Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, I echo all those points. I'm extremely excited for Andor season 2. Just even little clips like you're mentioning, that just gets the hype train rolling because it just feels and looks so different. And there's something about Andor that's just distinctly Andor. It just feels so much better than what we've just seen from Star Wars and what we have seen from Star Wars in TV. And it's kind of funny because you would expect the VFX to be the thing that weighs down TV shows, but it really has been the sets and some of the limited use of the volume that has made a lot of these shows not look as good. And Andor's just got perfect outdoor shoots, great sets, excellent costuming, everything just looks immaculate. So it is the prestige show of Star Wars. I can't wait to see it. I really hope they do deliver on all these things. But yeah, that's Andor season 2. We're gonna get to some of your guys' comments right now about this topic, and then we'll scroll back up to the top for the full Q&A portion of tonight's live stream. We'll start with Brandon here, who says Andor season 2 teaser is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. I hope the episodes of the origin of K2SO will be interesting. I hope so too. If we get that full origin in here, but yeah, I would love to see it. And of amongst all things to be retconned in canon, I am very okay with the Cassian and K2SO one shot comic book
Yeah.
from 2016 or 2017 being retconned or slightly changed or enhanced. So yeah, hopefully we do get to see a lot more of K2 than I think we initially thought for this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, like we said, just work with the material there if you can. If not, it's gonna be understandable. But I have positive feelings about what Gilroy's done with everything around this. I mean, the Gorman massacre may lead and cut off right as Mon Mothma's ship docks with the Ghost crew, right? Or maybe we get to even see a small cameo of them. But it seems like he's fitting the narrative and the pieces with Cassian, with Mon Mothma, with Luthen to all these other bigger stories that have happened already.
David says, "Let's effing go with Andor season 2. I can't wait. Gorman Massacre in season 2. And if so, do you think we will get any Rebels cameos or anything helping Mon escape?" I think we get the Ghost for sure. I would bet strong money on the Ghost at some point. It was in Rogue One. I think the Ghost. And I think the best likelihood for a cameo would be Hera. Hera's name is dropped in Rogue One. She's obviously a major part of the military tactics and everything that goes on throughout the rebellion. I think seeing Hera as the representative of the Ghost crew and the fact that you could bring in Mary Elizabeth Winstead and she would still be able to look age accurate for Hera at this point
Yeah.
versus Imanis Fondi wouldn't really look like Ezra would in this point for Rebels. Maybe you could do Sabine and age her down a little bit. I could see Sabine, but I would say Hera would be your strongest bet, and then Chopper. I think those two. I would love it if they did a Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan cameo,
Yeah.
just like very briefly. That would be awesome. I don't know if it would happen. Don't bet on it, but I think that would be a really cool little Easter eggs that a show like Andor has been known to do. And it's just to give us something a little bit extra. For those who know, they know. It could even be Kanan just kind of standing there in the background while there is a scene with Hera talking to Mon Mothma, and Kanan's just kind of standing back there with Chopper. I would be down to see that too. And he gets like one line, he comes up and like taps her on the shoulder and he's like, "Hey, let's go." And it's Freddie Prinze Jr.'s voice. That would be
Yeah.
really sick. But I think Hera and Chopper are your best bets.
Yeah, and I think, man, I would love that Freddie Prinze cameo. He's already been kind of staunchly against it. He was like, "I've already done my part. That was Rebels, and I only came because they really insisted for a Bad Batch." And I don't think he should've because he hits that, like, first note, and then it just falls apart from that, and it's fine, whatever. You can just say Kanan's going through puberty or something due to the effects of a war and stuff like that. I don't know. You can make some sort of headcanon around it. Um, but yeah, I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead, that's a great shout. Uh, I would also say Bail Organa. I mean, we know at some point he's gotta play a role. I'm assuming he's gonna be playing a bigger role, but maybe if we're not having Mon Mothma directly connect with the Ghost Crew, maybe it's Bail Organa connecting via hologram to Hera, to Kanan, so that way you can keep Freddy in the background and then keep Hera with Mary Elizabeth Winstead front and center, and then you get to have Jimmy Smits kind of play that role, segueing, kind of being the middleman in between them, and give him a little bit more of like that juicier. What was he doing, all right, to save Mon Mothma? What was he doing before during the events of Andor season one, right? Like he's going to be fleshed out. If he's not in season two, I will actually be quite upset because I think he's such an essential part of Rogue One. He's so essential to the psychology of Leia's character and the choices that, have especially been really impactful for her in the Star Wars 2020 line and stuff like that. So, yeah, he needs to show up as at least a strong character for episode or two. But if you're going to make it fairly minimal, like this is where I would kind of put him in just so that you can say, like, okay, he got that partnership going and really connect with Mon Mothma at that point because there's nothing left, right? This is a moment of survival, no going back. This is where she has to make her declaration, and she needs someone's immediate support if she doesn't necessarily have a cell or have the resources for that quite yet. So that's where I would put it for sure.
Yeah, and if we get him, I mean, I would love to see Carmen Bella Iblis too. Just do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we do
Whew.
have questions about Kyle Katarn and stuff like that. Anthony says, "I hope we get Tarkin." I think you'll get Tarkin in some form. We have talked about, and I'm not sure what the update is on the lawsuit that was going on between Disney and somebody else. I forgot who it was about the Tarkin
It's like a friend
likeness.
or something. Yeah.
uh, yeah, it was a British studio or something, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm not sure what's going on there. I would say we already crossed the bridge, so it's a very strong likelihood that we do see Tarkin at some point. Although Rogue One does frame it as like he just shows up that day and takes over. But we do know from
Yeah. Yeah.
Catalyst that he's heavily involved in a lot of the process. We know he's constantly talking from a distance. He's just not there. So I think in some form, whether it's a hologram where they can get another actor to play him without the facial change, but it's a hologram, so it doesn't look at you don't need it to look as perfect like Peter Cushing, or just a voice or something. I think you will get Tarkin in some form.
Yeah, and I think it's now been a little further complicated than when we first, put out that news on that stream, because now the Hammer Films documentary is supposedly going to use AI to resurrect him, which again, that I think
Yeah.
is egregious. Like, why would you do that? Just use old, back behind the scene footage, interviews, stuff like that around the time period to shape him as you want, right? And maybe you can do that thing that a lot of documentaries do where they kind of creatively interpret stuff happening behind scenes, the history of events, and then you just have like an actor kind of play that role. You don't need to use AI for something like that, right? It's in my mind a little too far fetched and pretty gross, honestly. But yeah, I think, like you said, we've already crossed that bridge back in 2016. As long as they're not using AI, if they want to like use some deep fake just to tweak the model already there to make the lifelike eyes come out a little bit more and keep it limited, sure. If not, again, hologram effect. Just do that if you really need to. You can make it a little bit more of like a full sized hologram in like Krennic's room or something. I think that will work fine. But Yeah, I think whatever happens will be mostly Krennic POV. But it couldn't hurt to get Tarkin in there. Maybe recreate a scene, or like make a scene bridging some like notes that are exchanged between them during the events of Catalyst.
Jackson Birch sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, Jackson. Saying, what kind of project would you like to see Tony Gilroy do next with Star Wars? Mine is a Thrawn show, his rise throughout the Empire. That's pretty interesting. An adaptation kind of Zahn's Thrawn book from canon could be cool for Gilroy. Gilroy certainly has the sensibilities of both a more grounded, gritty rebellion and the clean, polished look of the Empire down. Like he's got that down. So I think that is a really interesting idea to go that direction with Gilroy's sensibilities. Personally, what would I like to see? I mean, I think more rebellion stuff would be cool in any facet. I mean, Cassian's story has become more personal, and I think we expected rather than this big epic full rebellion story. I think season 2 is going to be the more epic side of this, the more galaxy altering side than we initially thought we were getting with Andor. But, yeah, I gotta think about it. Do you have any ideas off the top of your head, Seneca, about where you would like to see Tony Gilroy go?
I do, and I think it's because it's mostly untouched, and that is should be around the formation of the First Order, especially under Ray Sloan's leadership. That's a clean slate. I want to know what that transition is like. What are the events? What are they learning from? How does Snoke kind of linger there? 'Cause I think he's really nailed it, like you said, everything to do with that militaristic, clean look of the Empire, and obviously the gritty, diverse, uh, you know, grounded realism of being labeled as terrorists, but being freedom fighters, like all the POVs of the different cells of the rebels. But what is super interesting to me is like, how does the passiveness, how does the decision making of the New Republic that we're already seeing, I think, solidly well. It's not fully there yet, but we're seeing the signs of it through books, through that episode of Mando season 3 of like the New Republic's failings, or that it tried to appease too quickly and then settle as opposed to really pushing forward, right? If you're going to do that sort of messaging there, what does that counter, right? How does that allow for that First Order to thrive in the unknown regions with that specter of Snoke and then the hand of Vader on the back of Snoke's neck and his brain, essentially, right? And I think that would be the next thing I'd want to see. How does he handle something a little bit more fantastical, right? Everything that he's been given is just purely military sci-fi. There's nothing about it that is outside of his wheelhouse. I mean, all we're doing here is going further into like very, very strong political messaging and some action at best, right? But I'd say the most shocking difference compared to season 1 of Andor is that he's doing some sort of storyline involving Ty Venter, a little bit more about, like, the technology, development, what is that research background like, which again, you can make parallels to World War II with some crazy, stuff with the Nazis, with the Japanese, and, like, what their think tanks were like, what were they doing to, like, get the edge in the conflict of sorts, right? What was it actually gonna be used for, who was it being experimented on, all that. So I think this would be a nice thing to build off that as a base, but then actually flesh out the stuff that's happening here while still tapping into some of that fantastical, a little bit more expansive force mythology that is there and can be essentially, grown and, blossomed originally before we start seeing how it plays out in the more traditional Star Wars perspective. And Ray Sloan, I think, is the right Imperial to, like, follow. There is a lot of later which really whitewashes the Empire, especially with Pelion, like, this is the good Empire, and by the time we reach Fate of the Jedi and all that, it's like, okay, so now we're accepting an Imperial Empire is better than all these other governments and all that, which I think George Lucas would never have really, really gone for that point of view. But Ray Sloan is definitely someone who she knows she's not necessarily a good person. She's made choices for herself, but she has some belief in the values that she was raised under, that she adopted with the Empire. And I want to see what that means for the early First Order before she's eventually usurped, presumably by Snoke. And I think that would be great storyline for him to tackle, and just allows us to get into that sequel trilogy wheelhouse with an auteur at this point.
I think along those same lines, you could do kind of a semi-adaptation or slight sequel to Bloodline. You could have
Yeah,
the early resistance, the early battles with the First Order that bring
the
about
Cold War.
the
Yeah.
formation of the resistance, the fear mongering, the wars, early Poe Dameron, all that type of stuff would work really well. In my head, when we're talking about Tony Gilroy, it immediately did go to military, and so I would love to see maybe him do a Clone Wars story, maybe a show about or a story about Rex, a movie about the clones, a Republic Commando series adaptation, something like that. I think would be all really really cool. He does prefer to work with humans and actors and stuff like that, so maybe something a bit more grounded in that sense, bringing even more grittiness and some of that 2003 Clone Wars grit back to the Clone Wars for a Republic Commando style story or some type of Suicide Squad style mission with a Jedi. You could even bring, Quinlan Voss in possibly for a Clone Wars esque mission, deal with some light and dark with the clones and Republic Commandos. That style would be really cool to me. But yeah, I would love to see any of that. I don't see him ever doing it, but I think um, rather than Thrawn's rise to the Empire, I'd also be really interested in seeing how he would do something with the Ascendancy, or maybe connecting the Ascendancy to Thrawn's story in Mandalorian. We'll see, whatever comes of that, but I'd love to see that. Yeah, there's a lot of cool things he could do. I don't really see him touching a lot of the Jedi stuff, but I think he could make an awesome Jedi show if they wanted to. If they wanted to use him as one of the initial architects of whatever they go with the old republic, I think that would be awesome too. I think he has the knack for world building, and he has the knack for laying the groundwork between
Right.
characters
Yeah.
and vicious forces. And really, when you have the Jedi and the Sith in the old republic, it is just kind of the same thing we're seeing in Andor, right? It is heroes versus villains. It's the seedy governments. It's the different distrust between the good sides and the bad sides, both within and without. There's a lot of those politics that are part of the old republic that I think he could do well. But I think my favorite thing would be some type of war story, whether it be a movie or a show about the clones, whether it be Rex, or preferably let's do Republic Commandos, adapt those Karen Travis novels. I would love to see that. But thank you so
Yeah.
much for your super chat. And I think we should scroll back to the top now. We've now gone for an hour and 15 minutes. So this will probably be a little closer to a 2 hour stream, because we want to give you guys a chance to get your thoughts in. And we have a lot of comments from before the stream even started that we haven't gotten to, so we're going to scroll back to the top again. If you want to make sure you get a chat on tonight, send in a super chat. We have gone through some more of these than kind of looks, because we answered them through our topics. But going all the way back to the top, Anthony says, it's official, guys, my birthday is tomorrow. I will be 20, and this stream is an early birthday present. Well, we're glad you're enjoying that. Happy birthday. Hope you have a great day tomorrow. Are you doing anything fun for your birthday tomorrow? Let us know.
Yep. Happy birthday.
Critical Thinker says, what would you want to see out of the Rey movie on the slim chance it actually gets made? Oh, man. Well, assuming we're talking about New Jedi Order still, the Rey movie, in my head, when we refer to the Rey movie, I'm still going to refer to that Charmaine Obaid-Chinoy movie with Daisy Ridley, because that's the only project that has been officially confirmed by Lucasfilm to have Rey, and there is mixed reporting around all these other projects, whether she's in them or not. So when we look at the Rey movie, I want it to do one thing specific for the character, and that's just give her a purpose. And not that she didn't have a purpose in the sequels, but what I mean by that is what's her identity post the Skywalkers, right? She's so tied to the journey of Luke, kind of basically being our surrogate for fulfilling Luke's journey, because Mark Hamill is old, and retelling that story, that was a sequel style story that we would have gotten in the EU, but in the movies, right? She's been so tied to that typical Skywalker's hero's journey. Now she's by blood tied to the evil villain side with Palpatine. Where does she take her lineage and her adopted lineage, and how does she merge them? How does she use that to create her own identity and her own purpose and her own legacy? And I think that's the big thing is, to me, the idea of her building a new Jedi Order, great. I want to see more Jedi. I want to see more, I want to go back to Luke's new Jedi Order for the amount of, Jedi there are active. I want to go back to the prequel style where there are a lot of active Jedi. I want to see these big fights with lots of active Jedi. But that to me is also still too familiar. It's too similar to EU. It's too similar to what we've already seen from the prequels or what we have from Luke in canon, even if we haven't seen it yet. I want to see what makes her order different. You got to go into the differences. It really should be like Luke's new Jedi Order from Legends, where there are stark differences between it and the prequel order. There are stark differences in ideology. It's a place where different ideologies are allowed to flourish and interact and really counteract, whether it's, Jason or Kip Duron or Luke. Everybody's got different POVs and interests in the Force. And if you do go with the Rey movie and build the new Jedi Order out of Force users that might have been displaced from whether it's Luke's Jedi Academy or people that are just out there still, or people who just discover her, Force users that are older and have different ways of viewing the Force. I'd love to see all those ideologies clash. How does that all work? How does Rey, being, the adopted lineage of the Skywalkers and the blood lineage of Palpatine, how does she see the Force differently from a light dark perspective? I want to see all that really at the core of what it is. And then for me, as a antagonistic force, I don't need to see the Yuzhan Vong. I don't need to see the Grisks, but I would like something like that. I don't want this to be another government versus government type of conflict, the good government versus the bad government. I want to see this actually be a different Star Wars movie. I don't want it to be another rehash, a third time of rehashing Empire coming back in a different form versus New Republic / Republic coming back in a different form. Let's make this where the government is actually like solidified and there's another threat from either another galaxy or a
Mhm.
threat from within that they have to deal with, that's not just an invading government or an invading antagonistic force, that already existed. So those would be my big hopes for the Ray movie.
Yeah, kind of just scrolling through. You guys, you put a lot of questions and answers very quickly for us. We're both pretty long-winded when we talk out these things. But yep, Anthony, just want to get back to your point. Going to a restaurant in my city with my two best friends. Awesome. Hope you're gonna have a good time with that. And critical thinker, kind of what based off of what Liam was saying. You want something original above else, nothing cliche, nothing we've seen before 1,000 times. Just go nuts and do something weird. And then he also mentioned that Legends Jedi got closer to prequel Jedi as the EU went on, which is super different from the start because prequels didn't exist yet. And that's the thing, right? Like George Lucas, at the end of the day, even if you had these incredible writers like Lucino and all that really shaped the New Jedi Order, and that feels like its most distinct balance between their writing and what is coming with the special editions, whatever information they were being fed about the prequels, at least what was coming up with the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. At the end of the day, it's what George Lucas sways into one direction, they kind of had to agree with, right? And I think that's the advantage of, again, the Charmin film is that they are going to let Ray be herself. She's not gonna have to like be a little wishy-washy. That is one of the bummers, I'd say, of New Jedi Order for me, is that it ends on such an interesting way with the concept of the unifying force and how the Jedi look at the force, how they practice it, how it envelops them in their decision making. And then it within just 4 or 5 years real time, it goes back to that very prequel-esque past darkness crisis going into Legacy of the Force where it just plays out as a story is like another good versus bad. Sure, the Corellians kind of sparked the firecracker here, sure, whatever, but it still is very it is called the Second Galactic Civil War for a reason. It just feels very similar. It just happens to be the heroes are turned again very quickly. Like, okay. But yeah, I think that's the advantage here. Whatever's gonna happen at this point, I do not in any way with the prequels, with the sequels, the original trilogy out. I see in no way that we're gonna have a unified republic again. I don't think we're gonna have an alliance of any form. I think we're gonna have these small, distinct, different governments, and what Luke and what we're gonna see with his Jedi Order is that he's gonna have struggles with like fitting in with, the Senate control and what their supervision means, right? Because as we've already seen with the New Republic stuff already, they are appeasing. They are kind of building off of the tech and all the stuff that is there and systematically with the empire, because it's like you can't just erase all of it, especially not immediately, right? And I think that same thing will kind of convince a lot of these people, especially the centrists that do play a big role in the Bloodline novel, to be like, well, no, like that is a check and balance with the Jedi. We've seen Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader, I guess, at this point, because they don't know yet. We've seen all these different things going on, and then now we find out that Princess Leia was the daughter. Like, this is crazy. And then her son went crazy. Like, yeah, like you have to see them kind of push for that grasp again, if not more so. But the difference now is that there isn't going to be a unified government. I think we're going to see what it means to be a Jedi, kind of negotiating with different parties, kind of going as the force wills you. And I love to see her order be a little bit more way seeker like, where they listen to the force and they kind of just go where the force tells them to. They don't necessarily have a distinct path and structure. It could kind of be almost be like how in the New Jedi Order, Luke doesn't really have that same like hierarchy of a council and everything. Everyone's kind of on equal footing. I think that would actually work really well for Rey, especially if we are going to see some stragglers of Luke's order still survive, some Order 66 stragglers, all that. So for Rey, it's more about how do I take the best of the Skywalker legacy and how do I allow us to evolve and avoid the mistakes that were there with the prequel Jedi and elevate the legacy of Luke without, because I think no matter what, you have to. You have to make his failures soften with her and be like, no, like these all went right. It's just nobody could have expected Palpatine was infesting the mind of both Snoke and through Snoke Ben at this point, and how that was festering and causing all this damage besides everything going on in the government and all that. So I think it'll be fresh to see her kind of work on like an equal footing with a lot of people, because she won't have to have that kind of issue that Luke has, even in the EU, of that at the end of the day, man, you're a farm boy. How are you ready to lead an order of ancient warriors that have connections to incredible power, that has checks? Like, this is where Cornhorn's words come through and will be true even for Rey. But I think she'll be able to soften it by learning from the lessons of what Luke faced and went through. So I think that's kind of where I view it. I know you bring up the prequel Jedi in the Dark Nest. Sure, I I think the less said about the Dark Nest in general, the better. But I see what you're trying to say here. Like, yeah, why not? It's gonna be different. It's gonna be weird, but that's probably for the best, right?
Well, a lot of that too, they come back to more of a prequel Jedi because there weren't prequel Jedi before. So when
Yeah,
when New
yeah,
Jedi Order was being written, when it started, there were no prequel Jedi because there were no prequels.
yeah.
When it finished, there was one prequel movie to base it on, and then the year it finished, there's a second one. So they gradually morphed it to match what Lucas was writing. That's why we have Survivor's Quest basically exist, is because the Dawn
Yeah.
comes with the justification for why Luke and Mara are married and why Luke is okay with that. So it is. I wouldn't take. I would take the way the Jedi morph really in the EU with a grain of salt. I think the new Jedi Order is the one you should take with the most like concrete as an idea for what Rey's new Jedi Order should and kind of would possibly look like, the way it transforms, the way it changes new ideas, mixing of cultures, because Luke's new Jedi Order forms out of a bunch of people who already were using the Force prior to him finding it. It's why Kip has such a hard time,
Oh yeah.
with light and dark. It's why you have characters like Gantoris, all these different characters from Jedi Academy throughout the 90s into the new Jedi Order that make up this Luke's new Jedi Order, Jedi Praxium. It's all built out of people who saw the Force in different ways before Luke Skywalker came along and told them they had to do it one way. So then when those people start to fade, then the ideology that Luke's preaching from the prequels can kind of come back in and inform the youth in a lot of ways. So that's kind of your lore reason. But I think mostly the realistic reason is George Lucas came up with what he wanted the prequel Jedi to be, and then they had to copy it. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, what we're getting there. But Jackson Birch sent in another super chat. Thank you so much, Jackson, for supporting the show tonight. Saying, if the Rey movie or trilogy still is about rebuilding the Order, do you guys want to see them bring in EU characters or versions of EU characters, or would you want them to create all new characters? Well, I think the answer for both of us probably will be, just like it is for all things, a little bit of both. I always want new characters because that's what keeps Star Wars alive. I think specifically with younger Jedi, you need new characters. You need people for us to follow when Rey, whether it's her character dies or Daisy Ridley just says, I don't want to do this anymore. I've now done like 6 more movies. I'm tired of it. I'm tired. She left Instagram in the early uh sequel timeline. There's going to be backlash at the start. Hopefully it gets better as it goes on. Hopefully the product that's there improves, but there's only so much somebody can take. She's had a few years off, coming back. Hopefully it's better, but she might want out at some point. So you got to create new characters to really help that thrive. I think bringing in EU characters that make sense are great. Like we've kind of talked about in the past, there are a handful of people you could bring in. You could bring a Kip Duran in. You could bring in a lot of the solo kids' friends. You could bring in a Ganner. A lot of these different characters. You could bring in all those types of characters. But how would because their stories could still exist. Part of whatever conflicts going on. Obviously, it won't be one to one. But a lot of the big EU characters at the time, like a Kyle Katarn, which a lot of you have been talking about with could we get references to him in Andor season 2 and stuff like that? Possibly, but ultimately, one of the most important things he does is going to disappear. So do you kind of just start with his Dark Forces 2 story or his end of Dark Forces story and then morph into all the stuff he does up to New Jedi Order and beyond? You could do that, but obviously, if Rey's movie's 15 years after the sequels, that puts us at like Fate of the Jedi timeline ish. So these characters would all have to be either way younger when we first meet them or old people when we see them in this Rey movie. So that's the problem with the EU. I think in general, though, we could look at more canon characters that could be in there, like an older, wise Cal Kestis, an Ezra Bridger, a Sabine Wren, Grogu, all sorts of different characters who actually do make sense for the timeline that we've already seen in canon that for sure could come in. But I do think the core needs to be built around at least 1 to 2 new characters, even if you have these EU characters as window dressing and then eventually maybe morph them into real characters. It's going to be hard to bring in a character from the EU and fully make them a character right off the bat, more so than just maybe a badass Jedi in the first movie who gets more story in the second movie. It's all about the progression. So I guess long story short, I want to see both, but I do think they need some strong new characters as the foundation.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same sentiments. I think no matter what, obviously, raise your top billing. Just below her is Finn, and if anything, they should be 1A, 1B. But she is the one that handed that Skywalker legacy, the weight of what that means, and now the choice of like, okay, you're not only just a Skywalker by adoption, you are still a Palpatine by blood, and that's even more of a twisted thing to deal with than what Luke and Leia ever faced, and what they kept hidden away from Ben Solo. So it's like, all right, are we gonna have her be public about that? And does that mean that she's a little bit less of a order leader and more of like, you're top dog whenever you're around, but maybe you
Yeah.
should just be constantly moving and nomadic because that's probably for the best and let someone else who is fresher, who doesn't have that same baggage, right? Like I think that is the thing, right? And I know Jackson, you're saying I want Finn in it, but I mean, Boyega's been coming to Comic Cons now recently. He's been a lot more positive about the sequels and his involvement with Star Wars, and saying he'd like to, if the call is right, if the story is right, be back. I think the only thing he isn't budged on is like a Disney Plus show, which I mean that's totally fair. Came into the sequels, biggest trilogy, right? A $2 billion film as your first one. Why would you want to be down like downgraded essentially to a Disney Plus show. But maybe he saw Andor and he's hoping for something at that level. I don't know, but not to digress further. It is Ray. It is Finn. Finn could cameo in that Ray's New Jedi Order film and all that. And if we are still keeping with that idea that we know of it so far of Ray kind of being that older figure, at that same level of Finn, but more realistically, maybe a step ahead for that. If it is just that single film, is that those two younger characters that have been rumored to be like following Ray and learning from Ray, so they would be in that second tier as well with Finn. But for the purposes of an order, like I said, I don't know if she will necessarily be leading it. She might be influential, kind of be like a myth in her own way, but one that makes very concrete appearances compared to Luke in some ways. And I think the order would be maybe run by some of his students, right? And I think that would be a little bit more interesting. That's bring in some characters we've seen. Characters like Kai and Vo and all that from the Rise of Kylo Ren comic. Spoiler alert, they're all dead, but you could have others survive, others who had graduated of sorts and maybe had been going on more expansive missions for Luke's order, where he was kind of collecting stuff from the High Republic, from a lot of the past and all that. Maybe some of the differences, because I've always been saying all his students will kind of be like, Luke, that's great, but I don't agree with you, or we need to do things differently. I wouldn't be surprised if the ones that do come back are the ones who are like focused on the future, expanding out, maybe kind of doing their own mini outbound flight, going to like nearby places like the Rishi Maze and exploring the forest and different cultures out there, almost like a Fate of the Jedi esque, right? So have them come back and then be a little bit more of like a mix of what Luke did, a mix of what they've learned, obviously interact with Ray, hopefully positive, hopefully a little complicated for interest in the story. I like that stuff. Um, Cal Kestis, sure, but he'd be like what 75 or 80 at that point. He'd be like the old man, just kind of bumbling around, just having a good time. You're like, yep, you kids got it here. I'll just make some soup in the kitchen like Porter Angle or something, right? So I don't know. It'll be interesting whatever happens there. And frankly, I don't think he would be part of Luke or Rey's New Jedi Order. He'd probably kind of be his own Tanalor Jedi spin-off offshoot of anyways. But yeah, EU characters that would show up, I feel like you can do some stuff with like characters like Corran Horn and all that, because it'd be interesting to do something where a lot of the later EU kind of starts slipping away from them when they're a lot more bantam heavy. You can kind of be like, oh, this is an era and age that they weren't really explored as much. Here they can play a big role, not really rewrite or remake any of the story of their like older Legends counterparts, and then you can kind of backfill story and connect it to whatever their place was in the galaxy before they became a Jedi, or if they were always a Jedi, what were they doing in those early missions? Um, yeah, I mean that's kind of how I would see it. And then characters like that are like window dressing, I hope would be a little bit more of the older ones, like a little bit out of their prime, and then younglings and Padawans, because I think that's where you can almost do like a old, not old Republic, a High Republic thing, where you can kind of go back in time, and that would be the Luke's Jedi Order in animation or something, where they'd play a role, their growth, their missions, what helped them grow, what kept them away from Luke, stuff like that. So I think that would be pretty interesting to see, because at the end of the day, for Ray to succeed, like Yoda says, like learn from the past, the mistakes of the past, right? But still take the positives out of it. And I think whatever comes out with this Rey's New Jedi Order film or whatever, I think should still be connected to a positive retrospective of Luke's order, kind of told by his students or stuff like that in an animated show, or where you get to see that there were just so many factors that he did almost everything right. And one of my favorite quotes, it's like you can do everything right and things can still go wrong. Things can still fall apart, right? And I think that's how you should look at Luke, that he did everything right. He becomes jaded because he did everything right. Even his flaws were not enough to like collapse his order on himself. And I think that's the best way of putting it, place him where he is at the start of The Last Jedi. So I think if you can balance those, put these at the same time, do different generations of Jedi, get some EU, some new-ish old characters that we've just never experienced or met before, I think you'll have a lot of great Jedi for that pre-sequel, post-sequel era.
Yeah, you definitely need to bring in the ghosts too. Like, I want to see Mark Hamill as a Force ghost. I want to see
Mhm.
Obi-Wan, Anakin. You need to utilize the Force ghosts too. That's the way you bring in a bit more of the Skywalker isms to this movie,
Yeah.
and to Rey, is you have her constantly guided and encouraged and accepted by the actual Skywalkers too, right? Like, push that in and really make it a kind of a family affair. I think they should do that as well. Back to the top, we have a lot of comments to go through. Critical Thinker says, "What are your thoughts on the Battle of Jakku miniseries? I thought it was super mediocre overall, aside from some cool moments for Luke." Well, only the first one has wrapped up. There are three
Yeah.
miniseries that are coming out. I still haven't read it. I'm planning on doing a binge. I just haven't had time to get through it. But Sonic, you finished it. What did you think?
I'm not gonna say you're wrong, critical thinker. I just respectfully disagree. Again, it is a maxi series. It is 12 issues. It's gonna be a bridge to proper ongoings set after Return of the Jedi. But I've liked it quite a bit because again, this is a comic series that isn't necessarily trying to do some big major event. It's kind of trying to streamline all the separate stories that are happening at this point. Right now, I will agree. This first part, Insurgency Rising, it's very prologue esque. It isn't very heavy on plot. The next one, from the synopsis and everything, feel like it's going to be a lot of uprising adaptation and a lot of aftermath adaptation. And then obviously the characters that you're following in that story, especially with the heroes of the original trilogy and the comic characters. So I think that's going to be a better judgment of that series. This is definitely like laying out the foundation in my mind. But I will say I really, really do like the Luke stuff, like you mentioned. It's not the moments for me; it's the mentality for me. It is that perfect balance of who we see 30 years later in the sequels when he is finally like getting past like the mopiness and the mistakes that he made, and he's reinvigorated. You get to see some of that maturity, that calm that is there, um, the earnestness that is still apparent even in his older age, but the assuredness, the triumph, the power, and the heart that is there, the soul that is there in Battlefront 2's campaign, that's there in the very end of Return of the Jedi, that's been there in Shattered Empire and all that. This is not really a maxi that I think is trying to be the best thing ever. I think it's just trying to connect and visualize a lot of different things that early canon kind of threw out there and never really gave lifelines to. So yeah, I'm very much enjoyed that. There's even a moment with Leia that is very much indebted to the 2020 line, and I know you said in the next comment here that it's a shame that the OT era Star Wars comics haven't been nearly as good since the 2015 runs ended. Though I haven't been reading Bounty Hunters or Afra, so I can't judge their quality. Yeah, those two are pretty strong, especially by the end. I think Bounty Hunters, I'd always called it on our streams and just discussions with Liam. It's like the Fast and Furious of the Star Wars comics, but it ended really strong. Like it really hit a lot of great moments and became a fairly solid classic. But Afro also ended really strong. But there's a lot of stuff with the characterization of Leia and like what she's feeling about the choices that she's been making against Adelhard and the things that are going on, the little twists and turns here that she very much is continuing from that Star Wars 2020 line, which again, I think they handled her really well. I think there should have been more for her, but that is the problem with all the crossovers in the 2020 era. I think that is more of the bigger issue with them, more so than the actual story and the meat of what's in just the main lines themselves. And this is a first part of a maxi series that is very much indebted to Star Wars 2020. So yeah, I disagree, but I think I understand where you're coming from. Because if it was just this, yeah, it's very light, but it's really fun, man. I think there's a lot of cool things that are gonna happen, and I think Republic Under Siege is where things are gonna really, really start exploding, and we're gonna start really seeing stuff that's gonna become a bit more iconic from this maxi series.
And I've enjoyed the 2020 lines overall. I would agree they're not as good as 2015. Like, the 2015 Aaron Invader, Gil Invader stuff was so good for a start for ongoings for Star Wars. And I don't know if ever will get back to that level of quality simultaneous runs start to finish. But I would agree with you, Sonny. I think that those none of those had big event series that took
Yeah.
place in between the events, killed a lot of the momentum for all of these series and really made some of them kind of unbearable to read at times, where like the Vader line from Pack,
Oh, yeah.
Vader wasn't even in it for all the issues that tie into War of the Bounty Hunters, you know. So there's just it the momentum and the pacing overall for these ongoings have been disrupted by Marvel's insistence on event storytelling for Star Wars recently. Hopefully, this is a good testing ground and they start to improve. But yeah, I mean, I would agree. Overall, I don't think Star Wars comics in general beat, for your next comment, anything close to the best runs for Marvel and DC. Like even Ostrander and Durasima's Republic stuff, even some of the better runs we have out there from Star Wars, very few, Old Republic, all that stuff, very few touch anything that the elite superhero comics do. And I think it's always going to be because Star Wars comics aren't the main story. Superhero comics drive their own narrative, right? They drive their own story. They can be important. Each story is important. Star Wars comics are always going to be secondary to the films and the shows. So I think that's one of the big reasons. So I wouldn't compare them to Marvel and DC superhero stuff, but comparing it within Star Wars, we're not at the quality that we were for Republic or for earlier 15 runs on Star Wars long ongoings, but I think with a lot of the experimentations that's been going around with the formula of what we've done in Star Wars canon comics uh, in the post 2020 runs, hopefully whatever we start next will be able to have like a larger grand plan, something that can really
Yeah.
weave different events in more thoughtfully rather than kind of throwing them in there and then saying, well, all the books have to tie in. Because you can do events where it's just a couple of the books that are actually part of that event rather
Right.
than doing events that say we need every single book to tie in.
Yeah, and just to that last point, I agree completely that 2020 is not the same level as 15 as a whole because I mean Vader was just way too overextended. I like a lot of Vader. I think Vader is like a very soft B tier for me because of how it ends. But yeah, I mean I can't disagree with what you're saying about 15, but I will kind of push back that 15 is by and large better because I think Kyron Gillen, when he was on the Star Wars 15 line, those are the best stuff. Everything around Show Turn is iconic for me when it comes to those comics. But am I going to ignore that La Roca's just tracing and doing really bad stuff with Guru FEFX for the art for half of that run? Am I going to ignore that Jason Aaron's kind of going for that very light on plot, just pure action, kind of bouncing around nostalgia where his arcs are very disconnected? Not really. And then I think at the end of the day, I am a little bit more sour on the 2015 Star Wars line because Pat comes in for that final one. You have a very weird Luke arc with Warba, who I guess she does make an appearance in 2020 that softens it a little bit more. Han and Leia have a sort of Ord Mantell storyline, but not really. That kind of delves into their romance. Will they? Won't they? And then, uh, in general, I mean, I would say my biggest problem is that you have Vader fighting Chewbacca in a literal pit with all the heroes, all the villains converging in one spot when you could have just ended with the scouring of Show Turn. That was the perfect place. They literally walk off together into the Millennium Falcon, the big heroes, big three right there, right, with Chewbacca right behind them and 3PO and R2, right? That's the perfect end. And I never understood the need to put that in place. But that's just me. I think nothing Soul did necessarily beat the highs of what was there in 15, but
Yeah.
he never dipped to the lows that I found in Aaron and I found in Pack that kind of really swayed. And I mean, yeah, again, I don't love a lot of the artwork that Gillen's run got. That is what bums me out because some of the best storytelling, like the Jedha arc, it's really good for me, but it's just traces after traces after traces, and not great as it goes on. And I think if I'm gonna ignore the art part of the comics, then just because of this, the writing is great. Then I don't know. That kind of diminishes the whole point of that being a very fusion based medium.
Those are all good points. I definitely agree that I think Souls is more consistent, but I certainly, and I think a lot of it does play into the nostalgia, like having those reboots for 2015.
Yeah.
It was a great time for Star Wars comics. It really felt like a resurgence. And so there's a little bit of time and place when all that comes in. But yeah, certainly that line does hit some massive lows. Uh, so so yeah. But anyway, hopefully whatever we get next really finds the perfect marriage between the two. So we've gone for an hour and 50 minutes already, guys, and we still have so many comments left. You guys want us to go over 2 hours? We're willing to, but not by too much. We like to keep these around the 2 hour mark, but I, let us know in the chat. But we'll try to get to as many of these as possible. Critical Thinkers next one says, if Jason Solo and Anakin Solo's roles were switched in Star by Star, Anakin was kidnapped by Vergeer instead, do you think he could still have stopped the Vong in the end? Do you think he would have killed the World Brain in Traitor or formed a connection with it like Jason did? That's an interesting question. I mean, Anakin, I tend to think that yes, he would have, because I think Anakin generally is the most powerful, or was on the base to be the most powerful of the three. I think Anakin's also he's firmly built in his belief in the Force. He's convicted. Um, I do think the story would have not turned out the same, but it would have been an interesting twist. I don't know. What do you think about that, Sanak?
I want to say yes too. And I think that's kind of where the legacy of his name kind of comes into play, because there's a lot of dark choices that Jason has to make, right? And this is the evolution of his character from that animal loving free spirit to I have to make the choices for the Jedi, for my family, and all that. And those are questions that I think he avoided, especially for a lot of the beginning of the war. Not so much as, he loses his younger brother, and there's the war wages on, trillions of lives are lost, right? And then obviously the embrace of pain and everything physically affects him and changes him in Verger's philosophy and all that. So yeah, I think that's where Anakin would have been a little bit more willing to, and that kind of goes back to like the young or junior Jedi Knights, I guess, for him, where he's always like kind of fearful of his legacy, of his name, and all that.
Mhm.
And I think he would be a lot more cognizant of what he's hearing from Verger, what he's kind of being forced to step into. I never looked at Anakin as someone, because, like, yes, he is the most gifted, most powerful, most idealistic Jedi since his uncle, but I never saw that as a limiter for him. He
Yeah.
was gonna be adapting to whatever was there, and I think that's where you would have played a little bit more into that legacy. And I think that is maybe partially why there's rumors that George Lucas was like, "Get rid of Anakin Solo. There's an Anakin Skywalker I'm dealing with, 'cause storyline," 'cause maybe he thought, "Okay, I don't like that you're going with this character in the first place with very similar name," but also maybe he was thinking, how much of the storyline will be based on the choices that I'm making for Anakin in the prequels, and what you're gonna be doing for the New Jedi Order, where he's gonna have to deal with some of these darker choices and that legacy that is still unfolding, right? So maybe that would have actually limited Anakin as a character. I know people wanted Anakin to keep going. All the writers wanted Anakin to keep going, and I'm sure they would have found a very interesting path for him. But if it was written in the same trajectory as Jason and the choices that he makes, yes, he would have adapted. I have no doubt about that. But maybe he would have lost some of like that spark that makes that character special.
Moving on to the next one, we've got Brandon who says, did you know EA was working on a game called Project Viking before it got canceled? I found they canceled it off an article on Google. I do remember reading about that. I don't really remember what it was about. It was kind of a silent thing, so I did actually look it up to verify the facts while when I saw your question. And yeah, now that I read the article, I remember reading that it was kind of based on Amy Henning's game. But it is, I don't know. I don't think I'm not aware of too many of the things around the Project Viking, other than it was connected to that. But it is interesting that they would cancel another Star Wars game, this one much more secretively. and really, didn't really hear anybody talking about it. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That is a topic we never talked about on the channel.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because it was supposed to kinda reuse the assets of Ragtag and kinda take as much of the storyline and whatever could be salvaged out of that initial effort, and then that also fell through. And that same article and information that kinda came out at the same time was talking about how they're working on the Fallen Order sequel, and that EA Motive is gonna go for a smaller, unusual game, which by the end of the year, we found out was Star Wars Squadron. So, yeah, I mean, very interesting to see how Squadrons and its development was already kind of fitted in with the changing schedule, with these bigger projects going around, and they were like, "It's still happening no matter what here with EA Motive."
Brandon also says 3 weeks ago on October 30th, 12 years ago was when George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney CEO Bob Iger. Do you think Lucas made the right or wrong call to sell his franchise? That's a tough one, and I don't think we can really say that. That's a personal question for George Lucas. What we can say is that we've gotten a lot of great Star Wars under Disney, despite what a lot of people will tell you. We have gotten a lot of great Star Wars under Disney. It hasn't been the consistent product that I think we had all hoped. But with more output also comes more problems. But I think as for George Lucas making the right or wrong decision, I'm sure when you as we've seen over the years from comments he's made, when you sell anything that's your baby, it's hard to let it go. It's hard to say, "Well, that's not how I would have done it." And it's hard for us as fans too to not say, "Well, we want George's input because he's the one that created the whole thing." But I'm sure he's plenty happy with his $4.5 billion. I'm sure he's plenty happy hanging out with his children, and I'm sure eventually grandchildren, if not already. Um, and he's all 80 years old, so I think this was gonna happen at some point, whether it was selling the franchise or passing it off to a new CEO of Lucasfilm. George Lucas was gonna eventually leave Star Wars at some point, and it was gonna live on without him. It's just a matter of did he make did the only person who can decide if he made the right choice is him. And I think there are days when he probably wakes up and says, "I made the wrong call, I wanna make more Star Wars," and they're not doing it the way I want it to be done, and then there's other days he wakes up and he's like, "Well, I got $4.5 billion, I can do whatever I want. Uh, I'm gonna go here today," and I think then he's plenty happy he's retired.
I think we have to also remember that Lucas never intended for this to be his defining part of his cinematic artistic journey, right? Star Wars blew up, and he went to Hawaii expecting it to be a massive failure and then to lose any of the momentum that he had in this, new age cinema that was led by Coppola and all these other guys. And he'd been like, all right, I'll go back to being like a DP or like a writer and stuff like that. And then he finds out, hey, it's selling like gangbusters. And he probably looks up one day and he's like, man, it's been 30 years and I'm still working on Star Wars, right? So, difference being is that when that 30 years came by, people hated it. Let's be honest. The prequels, the revisionism around it is shocking to me. I mean, we can say that about a lot of things in the world right now, but it feels like facts don't matter. Recorded details don't matter, right? We have forums that are not archived, that are still there of people from 1997 onwards, from the special editions, going off about this man and his choices that he made every single day. And people now say, "No, no, yeah, like, it was always great." It was no, I think there are mixed things about the prequels that I think even he never wanted to have played out fully because he didn't wanna direct them. He asked Ron Howard, he asked Spielberg, he asked a lot of different friends in the industry, and they're like, "George, you should do it because that's crazy to jump into, especially with the nostalgia that has really kicked in the 15 or so years since episode 6 had come out," right? So he put out the vision that he wanted. It's an auteurist vision for sure. It's very much aligned with his politics and what he was looking with the world and what he was trying to say about it. Didn't really land in the early 2000s, started landing a little bit more. And now people are like, oh, it was always great. It was always perfect. But really, 2009 had Revenge of the Fanboys, right? Like we had documentaries of people saying the people versus George Lucas and how he ruined Star Wars. So when he sold it, yeah, maybe he didn't love everything that came out of it. He's critical of The Force Awakens. On the other side, he's like, The Last Jedi is a beautiful film. Does that necessarily line up with Star Wars fans one to one? No, but that is kind of the genius and a little bit more of like the strangeness of George Lucas is that you're never going to be one to one with him. Nobody would, right? Nobody can connect and see Star Wars the same way he does because that's his baby, right? So yeah, maybe some days he feels like I want to be an 80-year-old man just chugging along on all these different things with Star Wars. But honestly, I think he's happy that he got to step away when he did. He's coming around with the creatives that he's helped nurture, especially in the later years of the prequels, like Dave Filoni, connections with other people around ILM, like John Favreau, and all that. I wouldn't be surprised if he continues making a little bit more and more of like an appearance here and there just to give his opinion, give his little bit of sway. Like there's even a scene in Solo where they're in the closet with Kira and Han and they kiss and Han drops all the clothing. That was directed and given direction by Lucas. Like, why would Han ever care about Lando's fancy capes and coats? Right? That's not his move, right? He still deeply cares about the stories that are still coming out. He really does, but I think he's happy that he can step away from it, right? Whether that's a good or bad thing for the franchise at 80, is he really thinking about that minutia anymore? No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. But like Liam said, it's a personal question that I'm sure every day is changing for him. But he gets to, make his museum that looks really fascinating and huge. He's got
Yeah.
$2 billion of that squared away for that and whatever his family needs. And then the other 2 billion he already gave to charity.
Yeah.
So no matter how you look at it, George Lucas won, right? No matter how you
Absolutely.
look at it, he won. Now, does he want Star Wars to still be his? That's a different question.
Anthony says, do you guys think that Luke's transporting himself in the end of The Last Jedi was intentionally lifted from Dark Empire, as Luke has similar abilities there too? In fact, I'm pretty sure I remember Ryan Johnson tweeting when everybody was coming after him right after The Last Jedi. I remember him tweeting an official picture from the Book of the Jedi, or the Code of the Jedi, or whatever those source books were that they released right at the end of Legends, um, saying all the different powers that the Jedi and the Sith had. So I'm not sure if it's directly from Dark Empire, but it is from Legends power sets that he was aware of when doing research for what powers he could give Luke.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys are really well informed. I mean, if anything, Ryan Johnson was one of the ones who worked very closely with the story group. So it might have been something recommended to him, like, hey, this would be something that Luke could do here instead of flying on his some other ship because he'd already given away, or he had his X-wing was in the wreckage. At that point, the door for his hut was from the X-wing before it got retconned away, right? So yeah,
Brandon says, off topic question, which 2025 Marvel movie looks the most interesting right now based off the trailers between Captain America 4 and Thunderbolts? I think Thunderbolts has a little bit more of an interesting trailer. Which one am I more excited for? I would say I'm still more excited for Captain America 4, even with my overall kind of dislike of the end, the last couple episodes of Falcon and Winter Soldier, and with all the creative problems that seem to be behind the scenes around Captain America 4, whether it's test screenings that people didn't like, or reshoots, or rewrites, and all these things that have gone on that, would normally scream to be very worried about the movie. Um, Still with Harrison Ford in it, I think, because that's the number one thing with Harrison Ford as Red Hulk. That gets me excited, and I still do love the Sam Wilson character, and I think he can make a great Captain America, and I think it should be good. But I have more faith in Thunderbolts, I'll say that. But I'm more excited for Captain America 4.
I'm just excited for what Marvel's gonna do. It's gonna be a packed year because of all the shows and stuff that have been already filmed and waiting. Like
Yeah.
in that sizzle reel that came out today for 2025, you see Ironheart, and even
Hmm.
the CGI for that looks great because for once we're getting away from freaking nanotech. I know in the Captain America trailer you still see a nanotech helmet, but I can excuse that because it's not always gonna be on and off. He doesn't really need it. But yeah, no, I mean, it looks like Marvel's step back hopefully helps all their projects. The one that's gonna almost be a bit of a sacrifice play does feel like the Captain America film, but it's also in that weird situation where it's got a star like Harrison Ford playing Red Hulk, right? And it looks pretty good. It looks like he might be almost like radioactive, like he is in the comics, where everything kind of starts burning around him. I don't know. Maybe that's just the airplane crash or helicopter crash or something. Um, the action looks good. I mean, the trailers for this film have been phenomenal. Like this one is a very much a 70s political thriller, right? I know they said Winter Soldier vibes, but they're going for a little bit more of that political angle than Winter Soldier ever really was had time or was stretching for. So that I'm pretty interested for, especially because I think that's where Mackie can really differentiate himself as Captain America. I know people are going to be like, he's no Steve Rogers. Yeah, that's the point, man. So, uh, like, do I love the idea of him fighting Red Hulk? Not necessarily. I don't know if adamantium will come into play with his armor and his wings or something, right? Um, Still very unsure how they're going to change Sabra from her original comic origins to like this Black Widow of sorts. They added Giancarlo as Sidewinder in reshoots, and just today I saw pictures of them continuing to add some pickups because he's not really connecting to the leader, who is the villain of this film and stuff like that. It's just, yeah, I don't know what's happening. I'm just very shocked that the trailers still look pretty dang good for it. Excited for Thunderbolts. I think very much so that Taskmaster is a goner because none of the trailers have featured her. So maybe we are getting the original Taskmaster to kind of take over for the team as the new one for the MCU because I would prefer that version. I
Yeah.
think that Taskmaster in the Black Widow film is okay, not necessarily for moving forward in the universe. Um, yeah, I mean, excited. I think Thunderbolts will do better, especially because I think the way they're showing off Bucky more recently looks pretty solid. And the humor has seemingly been on point too. We got to see the Avengers Tower. That question finally has been answered. Who owns it now? And so, yeah, Valentino's got it, right? So excited, excited. Those two feel like they were going to be complete sacrifices. Now it only feels like a sacrifice at best, maybe a half sacrifice, which good. I'm hoping that they're both successes.
Yeah, hopefully if Captain America is a disaster, uh, Daredevil Goodwill will pick back up right after and then carry us into the summer, and Thunderbolt is a hit, and then Ironheart, and then of course the real answer to the 2025 most anticipated Marvel movie, Fantastic Four. Um, which
That yeah,
you
I
couldn't
mean,
say
all the
you couldn't
sneaks of
say
that have been insane. I'm like, the art behind it, oh, just so looks so good.
Yeah, and you couldn't even the other two because that's the easy winner. Another super chat from Jackson. Thank you so much again, Jackson, for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. Uh, we really appreciate you joining us and talking Star Wars, but also your contributions. Jackson says, "Last question, guys. Thanks for the stream. Do you think Lucasfilm missed an opportunity by making Grogu so young? Would it have been more interesting if Grogu were older and more directly connected to Yoda's species?" That's an interesting question. It's one I haven't really thought about. I'd frame it this way. I think Lucasfilm missed an opportunity for character growth for Grogu by being so inconsistent with the aging. Basically, by making just to have the twist of the first episode by making Grogu 50, it completely throws out of whack the entirety of the Yoda species aging. Yeah, they age slowly, but Yoda's 900 and he feels like a 100-year-old man when he dies. So he's
Yeah,
not like the spry chicken at 90 years old. He is old. So having a 50-year-old in the species who's basically an infant at best by the time we get to season 3 of The Mandalorian, which however long that takes, we have no idea what the time gap is between the 3 seasons. Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau keep wanting to say it's not even a year. It definitely has to be more than a year for this whole thing to make sense. But even by the end of Mandalorian season 3, Grogu is maybe at best a toddler, early toddler, like 2 years old, if we're comparing it to a human. So I don't know. It's very inconsistent with the aging. I think that's their biggest mistake is being inconsistent with how fast Yoda species age. When can we expect growth from Grogu as a character, all of those sort of things. But I don't think making him older would have made him any more interesting. I think part of the gimmick of him, especially for the first 2 seasons, is the fact that he's Baby Yoda. But, now that we're getting to the point where we kinda need more from him than just being Baby Yoda, here's where they have to decide if they wanna say, "Well, the Yoda species, it takes 50 years for them to become a toddler, but then over 2 years, they become, like, 12 years old." That's when, we gotta figure out what the aging of this species is because, Grogu needs to develop in the upcoming movies and shows.
Yeah, I mean, he was always a more of a long-term asset no matter what, because it's not like you'd kill him off at the end of this series. That would be shocking, right? Like that's he at the end of the day, he even though he's not a Jedi per se, he doesn't have an extended period training as a Jedi, he's not necessarily going to be a Mandalorian Jedi anymore. He is still going to be a Mandalorian. He is the Mandalorian for the era, even if Din Djarin lives or not. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Critical thinker, like it's a little bit more of a marketing gimmick. The aging's inconsistent, and like Liam said, it feels like Yoda is like each decade is a year for a human for him, basically. So you can reduce it by a factor of 10. He dies at like 90, which pretty dang good life there. Grogu is 50, but it's not like he's 5, right? He's been frozen for like 20 years of his life, so he's 2, 3 years old. He definitely feels like he's a little older from his flashback scene, and then when we finally first see him in the start of Mando season 1, so maybe he had a couple years on Naboo, before he was frozen away in carbonite or something like that. Um, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting. No matter what, I think he's a player for the New Jedi Order era to kind of be like a Force user leading Mandalorians that interacts with Ray and all that. And I think that was always the plan. There's just a lot less planning about like the timeline of the Mandalorian because one interview, Favreau and Filoni are like, "Oh, it's all in the same year." Navarro went from like a dead outskirts city to like a
Yeah.
bustling metropolis that's connected to all these different lanes. Instead of being like, yeah, it's maybe like 1 or 2 years, right? Like instead of being vague about it, they're just like, it's there. And then they're saying, oh no, no, like Grogu was training for like 6 months to a year, maybe even 2 years. But it's like what? Like what they need to figure out their timeline. Hopefully the movie will make that a lot more clear that a couple years or 2 or years have been passed. And then we're taking a little tiny skip ahead into that film. And then that's where Grogu can start being like a 4 or 5 year old where he is advanced for his age, and you can just excuse that for his species while he's growing into that role. And I mean, it's not like he didn't have some impactful moments in Mando season 3 finale. I mean, he was very much independent compared to Mando season two's finale, where he was captured, like unable to do anything. He's fighting off Praetorian guards. He's working with his dad. It was a pretty good duo, but as a character, yeah, he's not there yet. He's as an action piece, sure. I think he'll be ready for sure for the film. But I think we're gonna start seeing him talk a little bit more here and there in the film. Like his first couple, he kind of
Yeah.
gurgles like this is the way too, almost with him and Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. So I think we're on the verge of him maybe being like one of those babies, like once they start talking, they can't stop talking, and that's how we'll catch up.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to at least give some words. He's gotta at least start speaking in phrases or words
Yeah.
next movie. It's really gonna be how we track this timeline is how fast he starts talking and
Yeah.
how much he grows. He doesn't have to grow much, but, yeah, it is all a mess with the way they've done Grogu's, aging, so carbonite freezing could be a good explanation. We'll see what they decide to do with that. Jackson says, "Yeah, I think Grogu should at least be able to talk in the new movie trilogy. Then we might get some cool stuff." But thank you once again for your super chat. We're gonna go maybe 5 at most 10 more minutes here, so we're gonna try to sprint through some of these that you guys sent really early because feel bad for those people who got here early, sent it in, and we haven't barely touched any of these comments. So back to the chat here for I believe it's Anthony who says I love EU comics just as much, or I really I am also really excited for the new Star Wars comics. I've been a huge fan of Disney Star Wars comics. I love the EU comics just as much too, but I got into canon comics first because I did not know of the EU in 2018. We're glad you've enjoyed both. Certainly, both have their pros and cons, and I think canon overall has been it's maybe been the most consistent medium we have seen from Star Wars canon has been comics. They've been solid around. There's not too many that are abysmally bad. Uh, so thanks for that. Brandon says, second off-topic question. I don't know if you guys know the actor Tony Todd from horror movie Candyman, but he passed away last Wednesday. What's your favorite roles of Tony Todd? I do know Tony Todd. I actually did watch Candyman for the first time this year, and I thought it was excellent. It's one I've been trying to finally watch for years, and I did it in my horror marathon this year. So really, really loved that movie. So I would probably say Candyman would be my favorite. But I gotta look up his filmography first because I know he's in other movies I've seen. The Crow, yeah, he's really good in The Crow. Let's see. Oh, I didn't realize he's the voice of Venom in Spider-Man 2. I think somebody said that here in the chat. Yeah, he is the voice of Venom, voice of Zoom. He does have one of the most underrated voices ever. He has such a great voice. Oh my god, he has a lot of credits. But yeah, Candyman. I mean, Candyman has to be my favorite of his work. It is a really, really good slasher movie. Like it's just not. It's not cheesy good or good for the time. It's actually a very good movie. So if you're into slashers, certainly check out the original Candyman. But yeah, I didn't realize he passed. So rest in peace, Tony Todd, and thank you for all of your great work.
Yeah, it's The Crow for me as well. That's the only role I've seen him in. And he has a memorable few scenes in that one.
Anthony says, "Oh yeah, Brandon, heard of that. It was sad to see a beloved actor like him pass away only a few months after James Earl Jones too." Brandon says, personally, my favorite role of Tony Todd was when he voiced the evil speedster with Blue Lightning Zoom from The Flash season 2. That is actually the last season of The Flash that I watched. So I do. Zoom was actually a pretty good villain. He was. But yeah, that's a solid role. Brandon says his quote is Zoom. Never forget I'm the fastest man alive is downright creepy. I'll have to look up that scene. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I watched Flash season 2. Um, but yeah, Venom. I did play Spider-Man 2, so I didn't realize he voiced Venom, and that is a great version of Venom's voice. Anthony says, forgot to mention 2 weeks ago, I listened to an audiobook version of Dracula narrated by none other than Christopher Lee. I didn't know he did an audiobook of Dracula. I'll have to check that out. I'd love to hear his narration. Skywalker's Academy, we answered that one. Brandon says, oh, wait, no, we already answered that one. So we have answered some of these. Let's see. Where do we stop answering? A lot of this is conversation between you guys. That makes me feel a little better about where we are in the chat. Let's see here. Anthony says, I also just love how respectful towards those they disagree with, or what are you guys talking about?
They're talking about us.
Oh, thank you. That's great to hear. Let's see. Eli Thomas says Abeloth and zombies. Not sure what you mean by that, but I like both of those things. Anthony says, I'm excited for Sigourney Weaver to be in The Mandalorian and Grogu. Great actress, did an awesome job in Avatar and Avatar The Way of Water. Yeah, she's science fiction royalty, so I'm excited to see who she plays in The Mandalorian and Grogu.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna use her as a one-off, I think it'd be great to go with it's Izard. Yeah, I was about to blanking on her name, but yeah, just go with Izard. You know, as I know she's not dead. She has like a clone for Izard's revenge and all that, but her story for the most part is not heavy in those first 4 X-Wing books. You can kind of make her just dominate a whole film as the villain there, and then tie her into Shadow Council stuff and all that, and still let her be her own kind of thing. And that's all you really need out of that role. Like she, especially in those last two books, she's kind of just unhinged and just like waiting. Once she loses the mental warfare aspect of her character over your heroes, she's really not that impressive to me.
David says, I'm hoping Sigourney Weaver will be an Imperial officer, a badass antagonist, or Pelimoto's mom. That last one's very different. Maybe maybe Pelimoto's mom's an Imperial officer or a badass antagonist. Yeah, I think
What her
Imperial would
daughter's
be.
underachieved as.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. She's like, I'm never going back to Tatooine after that one night that I had there. Um, yeah, I Star's a great character for her to be. Dala's another good character she could be. But yeah, somebody in the spirit or the vein of I think the awesome female Imperial officers we have seen throughout Star Wars Legends, and we got at the beginning of Star Wars canon, but haven't seen as much lately. I think that would be a really strong role for her. She could be awesome as a Mandalorian if she is an actual Mandalorian as well. That could be cool. But yeah, I think in general, it's just nice to see her a part of this. I think it gives some clout to the overall prestige of this movie. David says, "Is the Charmin Obaid Chinoy movie still happening? If there is this newly announced trilogy happening, I don't trust any Lucasfilm announcements anymore. It is supposed to still be happening, but we know it lost its writer about 3 weeks ago, and they, according to some of the articles we were referencing earlier, there is rumors that they have a writer now for it. They just haven't announced what it is, or nobody knows who it is, or nobody has been willing to come out with that information and say who it is. Could that writer actually be Simon Kinberg? These articles say no. But yeah, we'll see. As of now, it is still happening, but it was supposed to start shooting in 2025. It was supposed to start shooting in 2024. Then it was supposed to start shooting in 2025. I'd be surprised if we don't see it pushed back until 2026, maybe end of 2025 at the earliest. But yeah, that movie is going to be moving from the December 26th or 2026 release date to 2027 regardless, or 2028.
Yeah, and it's gonna be interesting because you would think maybe drop Mandalorian and Grogu in that slot so it doesn't compete with Doomsday, but then you're running up it with it competing against Avatar 3, which is like, all
Yeah.
right, so they have to figure out like a midsummer, late August window. That's become something in the last few years has become a lot stronger and has been like desperate for like releases in that period. It's kind of been like keeping a lot of films steady for the last couple years. It's like primed, I guess, for a big film to be placed there. So maybe that's where they find a happy medium.
David also says, I heard the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie may still be in the works. Is that true? Well, I think the last update was what, like 3 or 4 months ago, at least, maybe longer,
Yeah.
when she did a podcast with somebody and they asked her about it as if it was canceled. And she's like, oh no, I'm still working on the script. And in fact, I'm, kind of restarting basically. And it's still a go. So it is true that it's still in the works. Does it ever actually happen? Ryan Johnson still says, if you ask him, that he's working on his Star Wars trilogy, and that got announced in 2017 before The Last Jedi came out. So it's in the works. Is it ever going to come out? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think recently there was some article saying like it's just repeating what we heard 3, 4 months ago and saying like Taika's is also in development as well. It's like, I don't know, man. Well, I'll believe it when I see it, man. I'll believe it when I see it. I need to see someone on a set wearing a coat trying to cover their costume up and like something half blue and green screen and some half set there. And then I'll be like, maybe it's happening.
Yeah, they the thing Lucasfilm does is just pretend like there's a lot of stuff going on by never canceling anything.
Yeah.
But they're not actively paying, nor is anybody actively working on the project that they announced. But they didn't cancel it. It still may happen. But yeah, But you also do like, to be fair to them, I guess you never hear about somebody coming out and saying, "Oh yeah, we canceled this movie." Even, but I mean, we have. I think the closest thing you get is Bob Iger did do an interview maybe 2 months ago where he said, "Yeah, we've canceled a lot of projects behind the scenes that we're never going to say we've canceled, but you'll just know because they'll never come out."
Please let Armor
And
Wars still exist. I want to
yeah.
see that. Please.
Yeah, that's one of Blade, probably another, even though Kevin Feige keeps insisting Blade's coming out.
Yeah,
Probably not. Um,
I don't
yeah,
know.
so I, he wasn't just referencing to Star Wars 2, Bob Iger. He was talking about everything at Disney because he's trying
Yeah.
to focus on quality over quantity. But anyway, yeah, that's there. Okay, so last comments here. I think we're going to move up to David's super chat here, and then we're going to wrap up right after that. Anthony says, I grew up with the sequels for Star Wars movies I ever saw in theaters. And then David says, I'm still sore for missing out on the Jabba movie by Guillermo del Toro. Yeah, that would have been really different and interesting. Like,
Yeah.
I think one of the things with Star Wars, this goes back to a conversation we were having earlier, Sanak, and when you were mentioning too about like the eventual burnout that would have happened regardless of quality, by just the fact that we're pumping out a movie every single year, spinoff or otherwise. Um, there was going to be a burnout that happened because of the way they were approaching Star Wars movies. Spinoff movies aren't necessarily the way to do it. It's not, they weren't forming a brand that was built on the cinematic universe structure. It's kind of where we've seen burnout with Marvel recently, right? Is like, you can have all these movies coming out, but the reason the MCU was successful is because everybody wanted to see the movie because they felt like it contributed to the next thing. Going into the phase 4 and phase 5, you got Black Widow, which takes place before the movies we all just watched, and then with COVID, it's unfortunate to Black Widow because COVID gave him a 2 years in between us seeing Marvel movies by the time it came out. But we basically waited 2 years for a Marvel movie that took place before the movies we just watched. So that goes back in time, doesn't contribute anything to the story. Then the next few are all origin stories. Then they all start, a couple of them start building up Kang, but he was never really that big of a villain. Then obviously the Jonathan Majors stuff, and Kang's no longer part of the universe. And then, so there's just been no consistency to the story, no build to the story. It makes each movie just feel like another movie that's coming out. It makes people then say, well, I can skip this one because I'm kind of burned out on Marvel and this one doesn't interest me that much. Where they would have gone and seen Captain Marvel or Ant-Man in the previous phase because they thought it might build on the story. Now, not building on the story. And that would have been what happened with Lucasfilm. But the way you get around that burnout is to make something super weird and different, like Guillermo del Toro probably would have done with a spin-off movie about a character in the original trilogy. And Jabba, out of all the spin-offs they announced or rumored were coming out, Jabba was the one that I feel is like the least marketable, but certainly the one I would have wanted to see most because of how different it would have been.
Yeah, I mean, if it was gonna happen, realistically, it's like a special presentation on Disney Plus because I don't see a 2-hour film with Jabba. You can say he's the penguin of the universe, but really, is he? Penguin's scraping for everything he does, right? And then you see the psychoticism that drives him, right? Jabba's just a dude who's just in a long lineage of like a lot of other characters being like this. He just happens to be smarter, just he's got the right crew around him. Yes, I don't know. When I heard that, I was like, really? We're gonna go like that? Like, what are we gonna do? Shape of Water, but with Jabba the Hutt? I'm like, I'll pass.
Oh
I will
God.
pass on that. But yeah, no, I think that does come to the whole question, right? Like you're saying that MCU cinematic universe question, burnout from that. And I think even the MCU potentially has a solution there for that now, right? We were saying they should continue doing special presentations. The rumor is they're not really going to, even though I felt like they haven't missed on any of them.
Yeah.
Uh, what I would say is like now they're figuring out even if we're not doing seasons for a character that we're following and all that, we can do like almost like Venn diagrams of like shared stories. So we've had WandaVision, Agatha. Now there's a rumor of the White Vision story that may be incorporating Armor War stuff and all that. Like in the rumor of Ultron being in that, and then possibly another film, right? So if you just watch that, you have its own mini universe within that universe. Maybe they're figuring out that's the way for that cinematic universe to still be fresh, and you can kind of check in when you need to, and then the films will still operate on their own. Maybe that's what we need Star Wars to do, because what they were starting with was like, let's just do origin stories or like a cool one-off story standalone for the Star Wars storyline, and then they kind of transitioned to doing that, but with films being turned into 6 or 8 episode seasons. The burnout was coming. It just got extended and delayed a little bit because of these shows and what's being filled in there. And obviously the Mandoverse kind of being its own mini universe and stretching out even less of story and some stuff like Book of Boba Fett and all that. I think that's what Lucasfilm can look at with Feige and what he's been doing with their creative team. Where yes, 2025 will have a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily connect, but they could be trying to maybe linking a couple of these projects into being like sister shows or sequel shows to each other. That you can kind of do the same here with your Star Wars shows moving forward. And again, be properly episodic. Don't be just half yes, half no. All right, it works kind of for the Mandoverse, but even then, from day one, people have been asking for the Mandoverse to be a little bit more serious, a little bit more fleshed out. So yeah, we'll see what happens next. The burnout was going to happen. Now it's here, and I think it's good that Star Wars is pivoting right before it falls into that MCU issue where it feels like it completely like unwinded because of COVID, because of the strikes, and then because of the quality of the content that was coming out.
Well, that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for a longer stream. We had a lot of questions, a lot of great questions, and a lot of news to talk about. So thanks for joining us for this whole thing. We appreciate it. Come back next week. We'll discuss even more Star Wars topics. Hopefully there's some more news and we didn't use it all this week. But we'll discuss more Star Wars topics. And as always, whether there's news or no news, we'll be answering your questions live. So make sure you join us to ask your questions and your comments. If you had one in the queue tonight and we didn't make it in the 2.5 hours we had tonight, bring it next week. We'll try to get to it as soon as possible. We usually post the chat room for the live streams about 4 p.m. ish Pacific time. So if you are somebody who wants to send it in before the stream starts, feel free to send it in and hopefully we can get to it during the stream. So we appreciate that. Stay tuned for more content. I have a review out for the Force Unleashed book. Will be out tomorrow morning. It's out for members and patrons right now if you're interested in joining our Patreon or membership. And then we have a canon authors tier list ranking that will be coming out at the end of the week as well. Stay tuned for shorts every single day, or every other day, excuse me, and community polls every single day, twice a day, every day. Make sure you're voting in that for your favorite Star Wars characters of all time. Thank you so much for watching this stream tonight, everybody, and we will see you all next time.